The March 31st, 2008 special meeting of the City Council is called to order. This meeting has been properly noticed and posted in compliance with the open meeting law. These proceedings are being video recorded as well as presented live on KCLV Cable Channel 2 and are closed captioned for our hearing impaired viewers. The council meeting, as well as all other KCLV programming, can be viewed on the internet at www.kclv.tv. The proceedings will be rebroadcast on KCLV Channel 2 and the web on Tuesday at 2:30 p.m., Thursday at 1 p.m., Friday at 7 p.m., and Saturday at 5 a.m. As you all know, the building is protected by a state-of-the-art fire detection and suppression sprinkler system, so if alarms should go off, please exit, and once outside, assemble on the Las Vegas Boulevard side of the property, and employees wearing safety vests or our city marshals will inform you when it's safe to re-enter the building. That's just a precautionary announcement that we make at every meeting and have no reason to think that the alarms will activate. Before we proceed with the agenda, would everyone please rise for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item number 4 is discussion and possible action regarding the fiscal year 2009 City of Las Vegas operating and capital project budget request. Before I call upon Dr. Selby, I do have a couple of prefatory remarks that I'd like to make because we have a transparent way of doing business in the City of Las Vegas, and these proceedings are being televised to our constituents, and we also have city employees who are very interested in the discussion that's about to take place today. I thought that it would be prudent to make some remarks, putting this within a context that folks can understand. I wanted to do this before we started our workshop because I think it's important that we face financial challenges that are being brought to our attention which have no easy answers. Our revenues are down, but nevertheless, expectations for service remain high. Even the downturn following 9/11 was less dramatic than that which we face today. More troubling as well is that we've been advised by our financial experts, and we'll be hearing from one of them today, that it will likely be years before we see revenues start a temperate recovery even to growth levels significantly less than we've seen in the past. So while today's discussion is focused on 2009, we need to recognize and remember that we may well be entering an era of moderate revenues that will force us to reconsider the way we conduct business as a city. This council, with the support of city staff, works very, very hard to serve our residents and visitors with responsive services, well-maintained infrastructure, the highest quality parks and recreation facilities, a wide range of programs for neighborhoods, seniors, and youth, and a priority commitment to public safety. We've been blessed over the past 8 years with a period of prosperity that allowed us to not only keep up with our population growth, but to start new programs, remedy our shortage of parks and recreation facilities, bolster our police and fire departments, and generally improve the quality of life for our city residents. Today's reality is that our revenues are no longer sufficient to sustain the level of service we've provided in the past. The city manager has already announced the layoff of 31 of our valued city employees in building and safety, and that we'll be closing many of our recreation facilities on Sundays, which is a traditionally low-usage day. I'm advised by Mr. Vincent, as an aside, that perhaps those issues will be addressed today, and it may not be as dire as I've been advised prior to this meeting. In addition, we have cuts, many of which are less visible, but important internal programs in order to meet this year's budget. From our briefings prior to this meeting, we know that further cuts in services are needed for the upcoming fiscal year. As the public will hear during this workshop, many of these additional cuts will be more visible to our residents. I expect that we'll have a wide-ranging and productive discussion here today about budget cuts, impacts, as well as thoughts on our future. I want our staff at all levels of the organization, and I'm saying this at the request of each and every council member who's sitting up here today who has come to me and wanted to express that we really appreciate your dedication to serving the people of Las Vegas and your many proposals for cost savings during this difficult period. I also want the public to understand that our goal here is to develop a budget for the use of our limited resources in the most prudent and beneficial manner possible. Finally, as I indicated before, our obligation does not end with this budget because we foresee the realistic possibility that further action may be required to maintain financial solvency in future years unless our revenue picture improves. So as a result of that, Dr. Selby, I'm directing you as our city manager and Mr. Vincent as our finance director. Where are you, Mark? The two of you, please take this directive to undertake a fundamental review of all city operations, which we would expect you to complete within 6 months, and the goal of your effort should be to give this council and myself a prioritized or ranked list of recommended adjustments, reductions, transfers, or terminations of programs and services that are neither substantially tied to this council's key priorities nor a fundamental operating function. Such a list should identify performance metrics where possible to indicate the value of the service or program, as well as its labor and non-labor cost components, and any self-supporting revenue with the aggregate net savings to equal or exceed the forecasted fiscal year 2010 budget deficit. Please take that directive as being a very serious one, because in order for us to do our job, we have to have this kind of information, and if we do it in a timely fashion, we'll be able to address our needs and do it in a prudent and wise manner. So with that being said, Dr. Selby.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Before we begin the technical part of the presentation today, I just wanted to make a few opening remarks that, as you've mentioned, Mayor, this is a challenging time for us, but something interesting has happened at the city. We've all come together, the council, the staff at all levels of the city, to work on this challenge, and I think it's really shown what this organization is about, to be able to come together and meet a challenge head on and try to deal with it in a responsible way. This year we've worked hard to explain through meetings, through email updates, through newsletters and other methods of communication what our expectations are for this budget, what our revenue picture looks like, and try to get our organization tuned up to what we know when those of us involved more closely in the budget as to what our challenges are today and in the future. We've tried to explain our approach to management, making our way through this challenging time by managing our way through this time using good, rational approaches, as opposed to waiting until we get into a crisis situation where our options for budget adjustments are severely limited and we're constrained in what we have the ability to do. We've also talked about as you mentioned, the potential for a sustained period of downturn in our revenues, and how, as our revenues recover, they may not recover to the high levels that we've had in the past, so that it may be truly a period of adjustment for the city in our operations. As we've had these meetings, as we've had these dialogues with our employees, they've asked questions, very important questions about what our priorities are with the money that we have available. What about job security? What about the future? And they've asked very good questions and offered some very interesting insights into ways we might approach savings. And we've told them it doesn't have to be $10,000 or $1 million. A few $100s, a few $1,000s, and it all adds up. And we're continuing to see employees come forward from all levels of the organization with some great ideas. Some we may not be able to implement, but nevertheless, it's a good sign of the organization's involvement when employees are comfortable coming forward and sharing their ideas with us in the interest of meeting our budget challenges. Although you've endured many briefings in painful detail about the budget, this workshop is your first opportunity to sit together and to have this important dialogue that sets the stage for us preparing a final budget to bring back to you on May 20th. So we look forward to your input. We're going to be here taking notes as Mark discusses our budget with you and as you give him feedback in anticipation of preparing a good budget for your consideration on May 20th. We have, before I bring up Mark Vincent, a special guest speaker, and I think most of you know John Restrepo. He's been in Las Vegas for about 20 years. He's one of our leading economists and prognosticators of the future economy in southern Nevada. He's been consulting to the public sector and the private sectors in the areas of economics, tax policy, demographics, real estate, and resort markets. So he's very knowledgeable about those broad ranges, and I think it's important to hear his presentation because it kind of sets the stage for the environment, the economic environment that we're working in as a city government. John's established his business here in 1997. He holds a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Louisiana and a Master of Arts from LSU. So if you have no questions of me, yes.
Thank you. Councilor
Your
Brown.
Honor, if I could just to clarify that the directive that you issued before the meeting adjourns today, could you provide that in a little more detail as far as the specifics and time? And that would be great. And Dr. Selby, as far as the meeting today and then ultimately May 20th when we submit, does not preclude the council from coming back in this same forum in a public hearing if more time is needed?
No.
Is that correct?
No. In fact, we do have a strategic planning date set for the council on April 14th, I believe. If that's needed, we can use that date. If it's not, we'll probably cancel that session.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, John?
Thank you. Mr. Restrepo. The record should reflect that during our briefings of the past several weeks, I believe each and every council member has been briefed by the city manager's office, different department directors, Director of Finance in particular, and Mr. Restrepo was kind enough to take us up on our invitation to give us a 101 course on economics and how the present economic picture affects our ability to define a budget for not only the coming year, but for years to come. So welcome to our City Council meeting.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Doug. I appreciate being here, and thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Mark, and also Scott Adams for inviting me on the briefings you had last week in today's workshop. Let's back up a little bit here. The thing's a little out of... What I was asked to do, and you guys, everyone has seen, the council have seen this briefing a little bit. We're going to go over it a little bit more for the public, and I won't go over it, take about 15 or 20 minutes, and then there's some additional set of slides as part of the presentation that we won't go over today. You can kind of look at your leisure, because it could get kind of boring and kind of dry. But again, thank you very much. The only other thing I wanted to mention to you, just for the purpose of full disclosure, I am the current president of NAILP, the National Association of Industrial and Office Properties, for 2008 here in the Southern Nevada chapter. And I was recently appointed by Governor Gibbons to be on the Economic Forum for the next 2 fiscal years, working with the forum in the state in trying to develop revenue projections for both the state and for local government. So just thought I'd mention to you as well. And if we can get started, some of these numbers, some of these information you're very aware of, some is relatively new, so we try and go over it kind of as completely as possible. And I don't know if it's better if I go to the presentation or you can ask questions throughout. One of the things I was asked to do when we went earlier was, what is the definitions of one of the three basic definitions of our economy or factors: inflation, recession, and depression. Inflation is just a persistent set of prices. We're all very understanding how that works. Just prices go up. Sometimes revenue incomes go up as well as prices. More often prices go up a little more than incomes, and they continue to go up. Whether or not, and that has to do with the function of the flow of money into the economy and a variety of other things. Recession is generally considered any kind of downturn in the economy of less than 10% over, let's say, a period of time, usually about a year, with a depression being viewed as a downturn in the economy of over a year. We're probably in kind of a recessionary mode right now. The economy has slowed down, but not to the point where it's a depression. As I mentioned in my presentations a few weeks ago, we've only had one depression in the last 100 years or so, and that was during the in the 1930s. It was the Great Depression, where the economy went down by over 18%. That's the last time that's ever happened. We haven't anywhere come that close since then. So a depression, because of the complexity and the diversity of our economy, and particularly our role within the world economy, is probably not likely. But we are seeing an economic downturn, not only here in Southern Nevada, but throughout the United States. One of the things that indicates in this downturn is the Consumer Confidence Index. It's declined by about 33% nationally since February of last year, between February of 2007 and February of 2008. This is done by the Conference Board. The last time they had gone this low was back about during the Iraq War 15 years or so ago, the Soviet-Iraq War, lowest level in 15 years. Prior to that was probably in the Gulf War, excuse me. So it's a pretty significant decline. That's something that most of the economists and the folks at the Conference Board were not expecting to see. So this is kind of a national situation. One of the challenges that we face here as part of this picture, in addition to consumer confidence, is cost of living. Something we prided ourselves with for many, many years in Southern Nevada. At least when I moved here 20 years ago, we had a relatively affordable cost of living. We would see peaks and valleys in the economy. One constant was a good quality of life, affordable housing, affordable fuel, and all those sorts of things. That all changed in the last few years, and we now see that Las Vegas is 109% or 9% higher than a national average in terms of cost of living, with the greatest impact being in housing at 130%, even with the downturn, transportation and utilities, and healthcare. So these are issues that we're struggling with right now as a community, and something we need to be aware of as our cost of living situation. What's happening with the employment growth, which we've seen so much, has been so well for us in many years. Between 1990 and 2007, over that 17-year period, we saw our employment in Southern Nevada grow by about 6% a year, 5.5% a year. That's essentially about twice the national average. Very good growth. We ended in 2007 about 937,000 jobs. We started in 1990 with about 374,000 jobs. So very significant employment growth during this period. Local government, as a percent of that, grew a little higher. Between 1990 and 1997, state and local governments, I should say, employment grew by 6.1%. As I mentioned earlier, the overall economy grew by 5.6%, as I'm showing you here. So a little bit higher than the overall employment growth, but tracking pretty close in terms of government jobs, state and local government. State and local government jobs over this period, as a percent of total jobs, has stayed relatively flat in the range of about 8.5 to 9.3%. On average, it's been about 9%. State and local jobs in terms of total growth. So we've not seen, in terms of job growth in the governmental sector, state and local, really growing faster than the overall economy. State and local employment versus state and local average wage. These are wages. This is total employment wage versus government wages. Overall, and this is not adjusted for inflation. The overall wage over the period of time was, for all industries, ran from $25,000 a year per employee to $41,000 a year per employee. In the governmental sector, it increased in 1992 from $29,000 to about $49,000. So the difference between those two, between the general economy and the public sector economy in terms of jobs, was in 2007, the average wage in government employment was 20% higher than was in the local economy. But it's better than it was in 1990, when the local government jobs were 22% higher than the local economy. But they've stayed within, if you can see those two bars, those two lines, have stayed relatively in the same kind of relationship with each other.
Mayor Goodman?
Yes.
Excuse me for 1 second. John, is that unique to Southern Nevada as compared to other cities of similar size across the country? Are we unique in that respect?
We are unique in that respect. There are cities that have similar relationships as we have here, but not many. It's more on the other side, where the average private sector job is generally higher than the average state and local government job in terms of the wage.
Mayor Goodman, with your permission, could you, if you could, expand on that a little? Why do we seem to fit in that category? Why do we seem to pay more of our government employees higher wages?
I think Largely, it's related to two things. I think the main thing, the growth that we saw in the economy in the early 80s, starting in the mid 80s through the end of 1999, say 2000. We had very significant job growth in the overall economy. We were not, so because of that job growth, we had to attract people here to Southern Nevada in the governmental sector to support the growth of the population and employment. That required to pay wages maybe higher than they would have had otherwise. Because in the minds of many folks outside of Nevada, Nevada has got a stigma issue. Southern Nevada does. It's kind of a good news, bad news story. We have great jobs here, but we have sometimes the stigma of living here. School situation, the gaming industry sometimes, the Sin City image, if you want to call it that. Because of that, we've had to pay higher wages to those government employees to support our growing population over that period of time. I think that's largely what they do, is more of an inducement to get folks here. Now, obviously, because of the growth of the economy, the local jurisdictions had the revenues to pay for those jobs. But the thing is really was, hey, how do we get them to move here? We're going to have to incentivize these folks a little bit better than maybe some other communities. So I think that's largely the reason at this point. There are other kind of more subtle reasons in terms of union labor and that sort of thing, but largely I think it was due to the growth of the population and the economy versus the growth and the government jobs having to catch up. The next chart is similar to the other. Now we're adjusting for inflation. The previous chart, we didn't adjust for inflation. We still hold those same ratios because the inflation rate, the CPI, we adjusted everything by the CPI, adjust everything back downward. So if you can see those jobs after you adjust for inflation, that $49,000 job we saw here now becomes $33,000, and the job we saw here for the overall economy of $41,000, now after adjusting for inflation is $28,000. What this tells us is wages, wealth, income in the community, both government jobs and non-governmental sectors, have been relatively flat. So, as they say, wages have been stagnant. This models the national averages. Cost of living around the country have increased significantly more than the wage picture. So while it looks like we're paying more to people, they essentially have been flat for the last 17 years or so. That's a challenge for us that we're having to deal with in terms of a higher cost of living community. This is a very important chart to us as economists, because we want to see those lines both unadjusted and adjusted going up. And when you adjust for inflation, everything gets flat. That means people are losing purchasing power, essentially. State and local government employees as per thousand population. We thought we were going to see significantly higher numbers in this, but as you can see, it stayed relatively flat. In 1990, we had 40 government jobs per thousand residents of Southern Nevada. We ended at 43 government jobs per thousand residents of Southern Nevada. So we have not been growing the number of jobs significantly. We saw that in the chart before, where the government percentage of total jobs has stayed relatively flat over the last 17 years. This is one of the charts that your staff asked me to put together. The percent of total jobs in Clark County that are state and local versus state and local jobs in the overall economy. As you can see, the pie chart on the left is Clark County, the one on the right is the United States. The two slices you want to look at are the black and the black and the yellow slices on the right side of each of those pies. As you can see, Clark County government jobs are about 8.5% of total jobs. In the U.S. economy, they're a little lower than, they're higher than the U.S. economy, about 15%. 15%. If you see the 4.8 and 10% at the bottom of the chart. So we're less than half in terms of government jobs to the total job base. So we work pretty efficiently in Southern Nevada in terms of the number of jobs, government jobs in terms of the local economy. This is just another set of percent, similar. I'm looking at it differently. Clark County versus U.S. This is 2007. The prior one was 1990. I'm sorry. In 2007, the numbers didn't change dramatically. If you looked at black and yellow bars on the Clark County pie, we have 7.5% in local government, 1.8 in the state. So it's, let's say 2. So that's about 9%. And in the national economy, the numbers are closer again to about 15%. If you look at the 3.7 and 10.4 in the bottom right of that pie chart. So we're still, in 1990 and 2007, operating pretty efficiently when it comes to total government jobs to total jobs. Another chart that we end up getting, because it ties into your fiscal picture and the fiscal picture of the state a little bit, is the Nevada PERS system. This is the ratio of active members in PERS versus benefit recipients. These numbers was very surprising to us when we got these from PERS recently. For example, in 1978, for every year, you had 35,000 active participants in PERS. You had 4,900, I should say, almost 5,000 people receiving benefits. That was a ratio of 7 active members to each recipient. By 2007, July of 2007, about a little under a year ago, we went to 103,000 active members in PERS statewide, to 36,000 recipients. We dropped the ratio to three active members for each retiree. That's a major impact. And it bodes to the challenges that we face both at the state and local levels in the future in terms of the numbers of active people paying into the system and active people receiving benefits from that system. Pretty significant change. Again, another indicator that we were asked to look at was taxable retail sales per employee. We did a forecast. We did from 1991 to 2007, and then we did a forecast. But as you can see, we're anticipating in 2008, 2007, we had about $38,000 of taxable retail sales per Clark County employee. We think that's going to go up to about $44,000 by end of 2012. We started out in 1991 with about $32,000 of retail sales per year per taxable retail sales per employee. As you can see, that line has gone up and down. That's the nature of the economy. Some of the dips are really related to recessions. You see the 91 dip below that line. That had to do with the Gulf War. The 2001 dip after September 11th. We had the uptick in 04 and 05 with the housing market. The decline again below that little line in 07 with the housing recession. Remember, so much of our taxable retail sales related to development activity, particularly on the residential side. Another indicator of economic activity and development activity within the city of Las Vegas is the commercial vacancy rates. How healthy these commercial markets are typically reflected in the commercial vacancy rates. If you look at the red line, it's the city of Las Vegas retail. The green line with the triangle is city of Las Vegas office, and the white line with the circle is city of Las Vegas retail industrial. As you can see, these numbers are changing quite a bit, and they're moving around, and we're seeing an uptick in all the sectors, but particularly in the office side. The retail and the industrial have stayed relatively healthy, but the office market still is getting pretty soft, and it's something we're concerned about because it affects property values. Unemployment rate, real quickly, the U.S. against the Clark County and Nevada average. As you can see, the two numbers in circle. The 4.8 is Nevada. The yellow is Nevada. The Clark County is the green. As you can see, we've exceeded the national average in terms of the unemployment rate at the sometime in latter part of 2007. We hadn't done that for a long time. If you looked at up until prior to that 2002, we're way significantly below the national average in terms of unemployment. We're now going up on the unemployment number compared to the national average. A function of the housing market here primarily, the downturn in the residential construction industry. Median price of housing is something else we look at quite closely, which is a leading indicator of where we're heading. This is broken up into three periods of time: the pre-boom, the boom, and the post-boom. This is prices for both existing housing and new homes. As you can see, the downturn. We peaked in 04 and 05, and now we're starting to trend down significantly in terms of the median price of a home during this period of time.
Mayor Goodman?
Yes. Councilman Bartley.
I'm sorry. May we go back 2 slides, please, back to the unemployment?
Yes, sir.
Would you please elaborate a little bit more on what it is that you see as to why, in fact, we're above the national average, and speak more to that, please?
I think largely it had to do with the fact that so much of our employment sector here in Southern Nevada, I'll get to that chart a little later, Councilman, so much of our employment in our local economy is in the construction industry. We essentially have had twice the national average in construction employment. Once that construction employment went down because of basically, to be politically incorrect, the housing market meltdown that we've seen here in Southern Nevada, massive amounts of jobs, people that were related to the housing industry got laid off. Not only the workers in the construction side, but also those folks that service the residential industry, the title companies, architecture firms, real estate brokers, all those sorts of people. Because of that downturn, it was such a massive downturn in that industry that it drove up our vacancy rate above the national average, largely because the national economy was not so heavily dependent on the housing market as we were here in Southern Nevada, relatively speaking.
Thank you.
Okay. We saw this chart already. The next one is the foreclosure rate. I showed you this number before. There's a percent of households in foreclosure relative to total households. The U.S. average is 1%. Nevada is 3.4%, and Southern Nevada, or Clark County, or the Las Vegas MSA, 4.23%. So we're essentially 4 times the national average in terms of our rate of foreclosure, which is a significant issue for us here, and you've seen the articles in the paper and all the discussion in the media in terms of foreclosures.
Your Honor, if I may.
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Restrepo?
Yes, sir.
Have you done any kind of studies in regards to who owns those homes? I've seen similar studies as to that one, that a lot of those home foreclosures are not Nevada-based residents. They're
Right.
actually investors that came into the city to take advantage of the market at the time.
Correct.
I just think it's important that tale is told. That, a lot of these people that are living in their homes are absolutely affected by this issue, but a large majority of those homes are by people who don't actually live in the city, live in the state. They were investors in those properties. Have you done any numbers?
Yeah, and it's an interesting set of statistics, Councilman. 50% of the homes that are out there for sale in the resale market are vacant. The resale market are vacant. And probably a good 50% of that 50%, so 50 to 60% are investor-owned homes. So overall, even at its peak, I don't think we ever got to 50% of all our homes were investor-owned. Probably at one time, small period of time during 2004, for a few months, 50% of all the homes that were being bought were by investors when we're really at the peak. But overall, probably of those foreclosures, maybe a third to 40% were investor-owned, 60 or more % were owner-occupants. Largely because they bought into, unfortunately, these exotic mortgages. They bought more than they should have. They stretched a little bit more than they should have in terms of what they could afford. And some of it was they thought it would keep, the market was never going to end. Some of it, they were misled by mortgage brokers. And some of it was they just acted irresponsibly. So there's a whole mixture of reasons why people are in foreclosure now. But probably a third were investors. The other 2/3 were just Las Vegas residents.
Thank you. And Your Honor, I just think that's important to note, because as we are pinned in as the city in the nation with the largest foreclosure rate, it's important to know that, some of them are, yes, are citizens and residents. Some of them are not. They were investor homes, and I don't think that tale is told quite like it should be.
Would it be a fair statement, Mr. Restrepo, that all of the homes, whether owned by residents or by investors who are non-residents, whether they're in foreclosure or they're not, will be on our tax rolls?
That's correct.
So even if a home is foreclosed, someone's going to get the benefit from the taxes that will be imposed upon that home, even if it's a bank that has to pay it rather than an individual investor. Okay.
Mayor
Right.
Goodman? Mayor Goodman?
Yes, please.
Just to piggyback on what Councilman Ross has just shared in regards to the foreclosures, is there a specific, speaking of Las Vegas proper, the city of Las Vegas proper, is there a specific area in which there are, you found to be a spike in the foreclosures throughout the city of Las Vegas proper?
Generally speaking, was obviously primarily in the new home subdivisions, where most of the activity was occurring, where the home builders and the lenders were getting most of that activity, most of the interest. I can tell you this: most of the speculator buyers bought new homes. And I would say most of the owner occupants also bought new homes as opposed to resale. So it's in the newer subdivisions. You see big clusters of them in the southwest part of the valley. You also, in the case of in the city of Las Vegas, large clusters in the northwest, the northern part, north of Summerlin. Summerlin was not as affected as some of the others because Summerlin has greater control about who they're going to let in and buy homes and all sorts of things. They just have more controls in place. But you saw a huge rash of these foreclosures in those northwestern suburbs portion of the city of Las Vegas, in the new homes, and in the condos as well, for that matter. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. New home closings is another tie-in to price. If you can see here, in 04, 05, we peaked out in new home closings, both single-family and condos. These are attached and detached. We peaked out around 40,000 new home sales in 2005. Dropped a bit in 2006 and really kind of tanked in 2007. About half the products, half the housing that we saw in 05 was sold in 07. So 40,000 versus 20,000 new homes during that period of time in the Las Vegas Valley. This is a chart that we've talked about
before you go on.
Yes, sir. We'll go back.
Could you relate those statistics as far as the the new home closings to our consolidated tax and how that affects us? When there are less new home closings, how the consolidated tax is substantially lessened?
Yes, Your Honor. I assume you can hear me. I'm Mark Vincent, Director of Finance and Business Services. A significant portion of the consolidated tax is real property transfer tax. And that revenue for the last 18 months or so has been consistently about 25 to 30% less than it was. So we've seen a significant reduction in our real property transfer tax. Although it's not the largest component of the consolidated tax, it has that. You can't have a 25, 30% reduction in that and not have an impact on consolidated tax. So it has directly impacted it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Mark, because one of the things that when you look at taxes and how taxes come in and go out, the ones that are affected the most directly as quickly are the real estate transfer tax, because once transactions stop, they stop, so the tax is not generated. The second one stops relatively quickly, but not as quickly as people stop spending. When you're feeling less wealthy, they stop spending on goods and taxable goods and services, or goods rather, and then you start seeing the midterm decline you see in the decline in the retail sales tax. The third one is slower growing because you got to wait on the assessment process and all the things real property taxes. They'll decline as well probably over time for a bit before the market ramps up again, but it's a slower, steadier decline than you would see in the more consumer-oriented house purchase tax. And then the other thing, too, that happens, too, during the downturn, not only are consumers not buying products, but since they're not building homes anymore, the home builders are not buying the products that are taxable to put into the homes. So all the construction material expenses go down as well, automobiles, all those consumer-related or consumer industry-related activities slow down quite a bit as well.
Yes, thank you. John, could you
Yes,
go
sir.
back one slide? I guess that's it right there.
This one right here?
One more.
This one?
Yes.
Okay.
With the decline in the new home closings and the decline in everything else you just said as a consequence of that, do we still have the same number of people moving to the Las Vegas Valley, or has that number decreased? And if it hasn't decreased, and the number is still the so-called 6,000 to 8,000 people a month, or 40 people a day moving to
Right.
southern Nevada, where are those people going?
It has slowed. The population growth has slowed here. People are just not moving here as much as they could. No one, the whole country's in this kind of malaise right now, so to speak. So they can't sell their homes in California, New York, so they can't move here to live. So things have slowed down dramatically. The ones that have moved in, a large number of renters have moved in to service the economy. They're moving into the rental homes. Some were speculator homes. Although we talked about this last week, some of those folks are getting kicked out of those homes because they're being foreclosed on. Many are moving into apartment complexes. So what we're producing is a certain number of renter populations going in. So we still have since we still have economic growth, people still move here. We also have a retiree population that continues to move here because of our tax climate. That didn't slow up a little bit, other than maybe the difficulty in selling your house in Michigan and trying to retire here. So everyone's being affected by this residential slowdown, but we're not to the point where we're not seeing any growth. It's just slower than it was before. And the other thing that's important to talk about, we've talked a lot about the 6,000 or 7,000 or 8,000 people that move in here. That doesn't count the people that move out. So we probably net about 5 to 6 in a good year. 1,000 people per month moving in here as opposed to the larger number just because of people that move out as well.
Did you say that again? Did you say that? The 6 to 8 moving in here, but traditionally in the last 5 years or so, how many people have been moving out?
Probably 2,000 to 3,000 a month.
Okay, so that's the net
That's
of
the
about
net.
4,000 or 5,000.
There's a certain amount of out-migration as well, for a number of reasons. The chart that usually shocks people when we show this, because we show a declining housing market, is this issue of affordable housing. These are numbers from the National Association of Home Builders, as I mentioned in our briefings last week. This chart shows the percent of houses affordable to families earning a median income based on standard loan writing criteria. And what does that mean? That means a 30-year mortgage, 5% down, 6% interest rate. These are the numbers going from the Q1 of 30-year mortgage rate, rather, Q1 1995 to the fourth quarter of 2007. We peaked out in housing affordability in the first quarter of 2009 at 78% of our houses were affordable to the families with a median income. That number went as low as 13% in 2006. And it's up to 25% now. So it's gotten better, but it's still pretty challenging for us. So we have this double-edged sword that we're dealing with, where we have declining housing values and its impacts on the city, but at the same time, we still have housing that's relatively unaffordable to large portions of our population, for those that are in the market to buy. The challenge for us, in addition to this, is the whole question of the credit crunch. We have, the Fed seem to be indicating by some of the actions today by Secretary of the Treasury Paulson, they're going to be tightening lending restrictions. They're going to be regulating the investment banking industry like the banking industry is regulated. That could imply an extended period of time of very tight lending standards for people. Maybe the elimination of the no-interest loan mortgage or no-money-down loan and all those sorts of things that kind of help drive the housing industry nationally over the last few years. So people will have to be qualified, actually, to buy a home. And so all these things are coming into play right now, so we don't know where these numbers are heading. This credit crunch, someone asked me today, what makes it different than we saw in the previous recession? In the previous recession that we saw, it was a completely different type of animal. We never had all the massive bad lending that occurred in the last 4 or 5 years. This is the mother of this recession is the whole dropping of lending standards, not only nationally but internationally, and just the free flow of cash into real estate and the lowering of those standards, and we're paying the price for that period of time, those excesses of a couple of years ago. And we think that tightening lending market is going to be with us for at least 4 or 5 years. And what does that mean to the growth of our economy if people can't get loans or the lending standards are much higher? And this is now flowing into the commercial markets as well. And so that's a challenge that we're monitoring very closely, the whole issue of real estate finance, if you want to call it that. On the bright side, and there are some bright numbers out here, we are expecting right now in the middle of a $32 billion building boom in the resort corridor, 31,000 additional rooms, about 78,000 new jobs, and about $3.2 billion of payroll. Obviously, many of these folks will be living within the city of Las Vegas, as well as the rest of the valley, so the city of Las Vegas should benefit from the opening of these casinos that we're seeing in 08, 09, and 2010. And we're very happy about that, because this is one of the main bright spots we have in our economy, that we have this huge influx of casino construction occurring today, and then the jobs that's going to create the permanent jobs in the next few years. The challenge for us, and we'll get into in a minute, is what kind of jobs are we producing?
But what happens in other places that don't have the successful tourism industry, which results in the building of these wonderful facilities? What happens to the rest of the country?
A much longer, more painful recovery period. We have a definite advantage, Your Honor, in this environment compared to other cities that don't have this driver. That being said, there were some cities that didn't see a huge boom during the 04 and 05, but are not seeing the downturn either. They're staying relatively healthy. My brother, for example, lives in Philadelphia. They didn't see the huge boom, but they're not seeing the large downturn again. So it all depends on where you're. But overall, we're much better off than most cities that we compete with, and most cities in the country relative to the resort industry we have as our driver. The challenge is, what they said in the paper today, is getting these foreign tourists in here, making it more easy for those guys to come in here to help supplement. So that what we don't know, because the numbers haven't rolled in quite yet, is if people in the rest of the country are feeling a little nervous about their wealth, about their incomes, their housing is not worth as much, maybe someone gets laid off. I know I've noticed, if you guys noticed, Aloha Airlines shut operations today and laid off 2,000 people. Nevada was one of their major areas of visitation. What does that mean to the psychology of people to travel? And we're so early in this process yet that we don't know. We're hoping that by the end of 09, 20, people feeling comfortable enough, they've settled in wherever the market is, where the economy is settled, and they'll get traveling again and coming to Nevada. But we're going through a unique period in our history right now that some of the old metrics, as you mentioned earlier, are not matched, don't match the future. Often, as they say, history is prologue. The past is prologue to the future. In this case, it's maybe a little different, so we're just monitoring these numbers closely. But that all being said, much better to have this kind of economic activity than not have it. So in that case, we'll fare better than many other cities in the country.
Thank you.
Employment forecasts, as we said earlier, we grew by 5.5% between 1990 2007 per year. We're still going to have pretty healthy growth between 2008 and 2012. We think about 4% a year. That's still twice the national average. Our employment growth remains slower but healthy here in Southern Nevada, largely driven by the resort industry at this point and the spin-off economic impacts that it has. Average wage, we talked about earlier the growth of all these jobs, which is all very good news, but look what's happening with average wages. The average wage in 1992, this is the green line is unadjusted for inflation, not adjusted, the white line is adjusted. We had a $25,000 average annual wage in Southern Nevada. That number went up to 41,000 in 2008 or 2007. But after you adjust for inflation, that number that we ended the year with at 41,000 from the state of, as reported to Dieter, dropped to 28,000. Again, the challenge of cost of living to wealth. That's the challenge that we're facing.
I'd like to ask whether or not when we talk about wages, or you talk about wages, does
Yes.
that include the benefits as well? Because I know in the city of Las Vegas, we have a basic wage, but then a rule of thumb is about one-third of that is on top.
This is strictly the average weekly wage, without considering the
Without
retirement.
the benefits.
That's just the hourly rate, yes, the average salary.
Mayor Goodman,
Yes.
that's a very good question. So when you calculate in the addition, where will we fare out in that respect?
Well, obviously, the city of Las Vegas and the state and local government jobs are folded into this number here. This is not the local government job. This is all folded in. And it factors in. The problem is you have such a small percentage of your job, of our local economic jobs in the state and local government, that this number doesn't move, would not move dramatically, even if we included the increase in the governmental sector's compensation, because the laws of large numbers. We have large percentages of our population, our employment base, do not have the benefits that state and local government employees here have here in Nevada. So that factors into this as well. So that's why you see why we're so unique here in Southern Nevada with large numbers of the private sector, if they can, go try and work for the cities in the county, because the benefit packages that are offered here are much greater than you can see even in our largest industries. I can tell you this, I worked for Coopers and Lybrand for many years, one of the largest, it's now PricewaterhouseCoopers, one of the largest accounting and consulting firms in the world. At that time when I was there, we had 35,000 employees worldwide, and our benefit package was nowhere near what could have been obtained here in Southern Nevada in terms of working for the city of Las Vegas or Henderson or Clark County. Very significant. So those numbers are higher for the government employing, but since you guys, again, represent such a small percentage of the jobs in the state, it wouldn't change these numbers dramatically. We still have a wealth problem in Southern Nevada.
Why didn't you work for us then instead of...
I wasn't qualified. It was only good to be a consultant. No one wanted to hire me to do something for it. You know what the old expression, those who can't do teach and those who can't teach consult? That's what happened to me. Median family income, another form of, another indicator of wealth. First was average annual wage per employee. Now that's median family income. We started out at $41,000 in the fourth quarter of 1995. That was our base year. We ended at $59,000 unadjusted, and then we project $68,000 by 2012. 2012. When you adjust for inflation, at $59,000 in 07, dropped to $46,000, and it'll stay at about $46,000 in 08. Again, in 2012, as you can see, the point of the chart is wages and wealth and income and median have been stayed flat. This is, again, not unique to Southern Nevada. This is a national phenomenon in terms of wages and wealth. Real quickly, some specific numbers of the city of Las Vegas. These numbers we obtained from your staff. This is your breakdown of the C-tax, the property tax, license and franchise fees, and others. You can see where the numbers are focused. The yellow and white sections of the bar are where the bulk of your taxes are. As we talked about earlier, the C-tax is largely driven by the retail sales tax, and real estate transfer tax, and the property tax is your assessed valuation. This one from FY 2003 to FY 07, a 5-year revenue history. This is a percent of total. You can see the numbers. They've stayed relatively constant over the period of time. Each of the revenue sources is a percent of total revenues for the city. Not much change in these numbers. The overall bars are getting taller, but the ratios between the different taxes are about the same. Another component here, which is an indicator of economic activity, gross gaming revenues, the Clark County overall versus downtown. The little green bars on the right side of the tall bars of the city's share of overall gaming revenues, or at least in the downtown portion of the city. You can see the numbers have been relatively flat for the city first since 2002. Largely a function that a lot of loop properties opening up. This is a classic case of supply driving demand. Since you have not had any mega resorts opening in the downtown area, it hasn't had a major impact on the gaming revenues in the downtown area. Commercial building permits, from the first quarter of '05 to the fourth quarter of '07, again, an indicator of commercial building activity. This is the value of the permits. The yellow tall bars are the Clark County value of permits. The red bars at the bottom of the City of Las Vegas. Share of total permits, of total value, commercial values. The value of all permits. This is residential permits. Remember, in the commercial discussion, we always talk about value. In the residential side, we always talk about the number of permits. Permit numbers do not matter in commercial. You could have one project, which is one permit, like Project City Center at $8 billion, throws everything off. So the actual numbers don't count. It's really the value of the permits. And so as you can see, this is the number of permits residentially. Again, this is largely a function, in our opinion, we talked to Mark about this, in terms of and this is also a function of here as well, both the commercial and residential, is the lack of the developable land in the valley is slowing your growth compared to the other portions of the valley. You don't have, with the exception of the Cow Canyon area, a lot of new growth areas to develop. And so a lot of the permitting activity, as well as commercial and residential, heads to where the land is, essentially. So one challenge that we see facing the city in the future is this issue of your land constraint. What can you deal with that, in fact? And how do you adjust your management plans and your public policy, help your public policies with the fact that you're at a bit of a disadvantage relative to the other jurisdictions in terms of your land constraint situation here in Las Vegas. Retail forward supply, again, a function of constraints on supply land. This is all that we know in terms of speculative retail shopping center construction. The tall bars of the valley in terms of millions of square feet. The little red bars below are the city's share of all that square feet it's under construction or proposed in different periods of time. As you can see, it declined quite a bit in the last few years of that period. Same thing for the office portion. Forward supply, under construction and plan, total valley versus the city. And then industrial. Almost non-existent the last few years. Not much industrial land left within the city boundaries, largely due to the lack of land and the cost of land. The industrial developers are very sensitive in terms of the price of land that they can pay for their industrial uses. So what's next? We see a 2-year recovery period for the housing market, at least 2 years, in our opinion, from this point forward. Housing slump, reduce property taxes, and we think the housing slump is going to reduce property taxes for the city in FY09, possibly FY10. Consumer confidence, the recession is likely to see a slowdown in the C-tax rebound. We saw that drop-off, that 36% decline in consumer confidence that we talked about earlier. That's going to have an effect on shopping and spending. Tougher lending standards, we mentioned that earlier, both commercial and residential in terms of national. This is a national trend, that's just not Southern Nevada. Strong employment growth. We're going to see healthy employment growth, and that's going to, in our opinion, have a strong demand for rental housing. So the wave of the future, in our opinion, in the valley, in particularly the city of Las Vegas, is the growth of the for rent apartment market. We think there's going to be a huge demand for apartments and rental housing in the valley, and particularly in Las Vegas over the next 10 years or so.
Question, Mayor
Yes, sir.
Goodman.
Yes.
Going back to the strong employment growth, to make the assessment that you will see a stronger push for the residential market, for the rental market versus the
For sale.
the for sale?
Rather than the for sale. For rent rather than for sale. Yes.
Correct. Elaborate a little bit more on that in the sense of why not more of the for sale single-family detached versus the rental market?
As I mentioned earlier, simple thing, income versus prices. As much as the prices have slowed and softened in Southern Nevada, there's still a huge disconnect between median family income and median household income and house price. As we saw earlier, the chart that showed we peaked out in housing affordability at 78% of all houses being affordable to the median family. We're down to 25%. If that's the case, what we're producing is huge numbers of jobs that are renters. We think over time, and we mentioned this in one of our presentations, right now the ratio between owner-occupied homes in the valley and renter-occupied homes in the inventory is 60-40, 60% owner, 40% renter. We think over time that's going to flip to 60% renters, 40% owners because of the costs the cost situation in the Valley. And if you become a new home buyer or a young buyer, first home buyer, you may be forced to travel outside the Valley for that home, whether it's northern Arizona or Pahrump or Mesquite or some of these other kind of satellite communities outside the Las Vegas Valley. This affects not only the city, but all the jurisdictions within the urban core.
And does that have a lot to do with the number of houses we have in inventory that are vacant today, as to the flip, the 46?
No, it has to do with the fact that once you burn off that inventory, the house prices are going to start ramping up again, and since we're not producing a lot of high-paid employees in the Valley per se, they're going to be primarily renters over time, become renters as opposed, or stay renting longer than, it's going to take them longer to buy a home. And that's not including the fact that we have a credit crunch. So if you can't get easy money and your incomes are a little lower than the median price house, what does that mean? That means you
You're stuck
probably
in the rental.
maybe not become a permanent renter like you have in New York, for example, and other urban areas like that, but you may be a renter for a longer period of time.
Correct.
Mayor Goodman?
Yes.
Excuse me. John, when you
Yes,
told
sir.
us in our briefing last week about this shift from the 60% ownership and 40% rental that it's going to flip, it struck a nerve with me because I've been talking about a shrinkage in rental inventory for a few years now.
Right.
Recognizing that in my opinion, we had it and we obviously continue to have it.
Right.
My question is this: is the development community recognizing what you're talking about and doing anything about it?
Yes, they finally are, Councilman. I'm glad you brought that up. For many years, at least the last, probably 7 or 8 years, the apartment developer community left the Valley. Too expensive. Between the housing price, the cost of construction, because of the resort industry demand for construction labor, and the price of land, they just left the market. We've noticed in the last 6 or 9 months, some of those clients of ours that kind of left the market are coming back, and we get a call that sounds like the following. John, we understand the Vegas market is soft. How's the land markets doing? We're interested in getting back in. We think there's a huge potential for rental housing in Southern Nevada, huge demand because of the growth of the economy, the constraint on competition because of the lack of land in a certain way, and the fact that your incomes don't match housing prices. We think it's time to jump back in the market. But we really got to get that land price below that $1 million that you guys in Vegas were wanting all over the last few years. Is it getting below that? And I say, yeah, I'm talking to the commercial real estate the land brokers here in town. They're all telling me the same thing. The owners are starting to finally say, this thing's not coming back swiftly. If I want to sell this piece of property, I need to lower my price, get it back into commerce. Better to set it for $700,000 and $1 million, and sitting on it for $1 million, not have any buyers for the next 4 years. So we're starting to see some softening in the land markets, encouraging developers of apartment complexes to jump back in. Still early stages, but we think if we were having this conversation a year and a half from now, Councilman, you'll be seeing probably a lot of apartment permits coming through, entitlement process going through for the apartment market here in Southern Nevada, particularly in the city of Las Vegas. Did that answer your question in a long-winded consultant sort of way? Okay, good. The other thing we talked about earlier, the other thing we see in the future is the whole issue of airport capacity and homeland security. As I mentioned earlier, we saw in the paper this morning the challenges we're facing with foreign tourism coming into the country, and the challenge we may be facing between a gap between the time McCarran reaches capacity and Ivanpah opens up. So there's some challenges we're facing in trying to get the volume of tourists into the Valley, even with the rooms that are available. So that's something we're going to be watching very closely over the next couple of years. That also ties into highway transportation issues. Mayor, I know you've been very involved in, and you as well, Councilman, the whole issue of what is our infrastructure. At the end of the day, it's not so much the supply and demand for the Las Vegas experience that's in question. We have a very dynamic, strong economy here in Southern Nevada and a product that the world wants to have. It's how do we get all those folks in here if we're constrained at the airport and in our roads. So the whole issue of the bottleneck of infrastructure is a very challenging thing that we need to face and look at it with a clear set of eyes and looking at new innovative solutions, and just understand it's something that we're going to have to deal with. And finally, the thing that we've learned, and it's going to be the case for a long time to come, is that the world has shrunk. At least the economy of the world has shrunk. We're all one part of this large worldwide economy. And as someone said to me the other day, when the world sneezes, we can catch a cold here in Southern Nevada. So we just have to understand that we're not just an isolated community in the southwestern United States. We're integrally tied to the national economy and to the world economy. And whatever happens around the world, whether it's Asia, Europe, Africa, well, it doesn't matter. It can affect us here in Southern Nevada, and it can affect us quickly, as we saw with this housing crunch. Because remember what happened. A lot of the the credit crunch that occurred was foreign governments stopped buying commercial paper and residential mortgage paper that help speed up the housing collapse. So everyone's kind of in this game together. So it's just something we need to always keep aware of here in Southern Nevada when we think we have to worry about Southern Nevada. We have to worry about what's going on in other parts of the world too as well. And that's kind of the thing that was the most shocking to us that we learned in the last few months. Anyway, that's the end of my presentation. The rest is appendix, additional charts and graphs that you can look at your leisure. And again, everyone's got my email address, and you can go through Mark or through your staff and waiting to answer any question or provide you additional information that you may think of later today that I can always send to Mark, and he can get it out to the council at your convenience. So I'm here to answer any of your questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments? Yes, Councilman.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor. John, you did a great job. Thank you very much. Your briefing last week was excellent, and today as well. But what you've done is you've just basically given us the status. What is our status now? Let me ask you this. And I don't know if you have an expertise in this area, but as a governing body, as a city council, we have certain obligations and we have certain things we should be doing. What would your suggestion to us be, recognizing the fiscal situation we're in?
There are difficult times. You have to look at your cost structure, how money is being spent. Are there ways that you can, instead of doing things internally, outsource to get more efficiencies? That's one area. The old expression: if you can find it in the phone book, you should use the private sector to do it, and not internal if it's a service offered by the private sector. That's one area. The other area, and let's keep in mind, you're not going to be able to create additional land. There's a few other areas you can expand, but at the end of the day, Las Vegas is largely built out relative to the other cities in the valley. That's just a fact of life. So a combination of both. What is the city doing internally to operate as efficiently as it can? And the other area we've been talking to a number of our public sector clients about, are you maximizing your use of assets as best as you can? And one of the major assets you have some control over that oftentimes is forgotten is your real estate assets. Are there properties and lands owned by the city that you really don't need anymore, you can maybe sell? Or maybe you can put to a higher and better use. So there's a more efficient use of your real estate assets. I know just as a kind of an example, we were retained a year ago or so by UNLV to assist them in the final thing. They were looking for additional sources of revenue. They're limited in terms of their tax and the budget issues, and they brought us in to assist them look at their property holdings. What could they do with their lands? Is there better efficient use of the UNLV campus? They have, the Harry Reid Technology Park they're looking at. They have a piece of property possibly in North Las Vegas they may be getting. So how can they better use those assets? So that's one area I would look at. I know Scott Adams is doing a great job with you guys in the downtown area, looking at all your real estate holdings and all the property you control. And what other areas do you have that you can work with to make sure you get the highest and best use of those assets? Beyond that, the other area is negotiating labor agreements and all those sorts of things that come into play at some time in the future as well. So there is no silver bullet. It's just a series of small steps that you have to combine together, hopefully, whether it's efficiency and better use of assets and negotiating contracts. There's a variety of things you have to look at to see where you can move forward, because this is a challenge for all. The private sector is going through it right now as well. No one's in great shape right now. Everyone's looking at different ways to cut back and redo and do things differently. Did that answer your question?
Anybody else at this time? Well, thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you.
Restrepo. We appreciate it, and we will take advantage of your offer. If we need
Anytime,
to.
Your Honor. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank you.
Mr. Vincent. Uh-oh, this is a 2-bottle speech?
And I won't even tell you what's in them.
Oh, now you got me interested.
Thank you, and thank you, John, for helping us out in setting the stage. And I don't think that anything that John has mentioned to you is much different than what we've been talking about the last few months. I'm going to try to do something a little bit different this time. I'm going to try to use a color pointer with my slides, so bear with me. Actually, I want to go over our schedule first. As you know, we have staff is currently working to file our tentative budget. We're putting the schedules together. I think it was mentioned that we have a strategic planning workshop coming up on April 14th as well. We have the Citizens Advisory Priority Committee meeting with my financial folks on April 23rd to go over what we've done and perhaps come up with some other suggestions for us. Our budget hearing is on May 20th. That's set by statute. And then June 2nd is when we have to file our budget with the state, so that's the schedule. Okay.
Yes, Councilman Brown.
Mark, in the past, you've indicated that by statute, we're allowed to augment our budget one time per fiscal year.
That was capital.
Yeah.
Council can take an action at any time to amend our budget, but capital, we're only allowed one correction a year. There we go. Okay. Generally, just to dovetail with what John was talking about, our impacts for the city of Las Vegas are going to be different than what we're going to see in some of the other local cities. We've talked about that before. The reality is, for many of the reasons that we've talked about before, the city of Las Vegas, our population growth rate and the growth rate of our assessed value, two major indicators of the city's growth, we have been growing healthily, but at far lower levels than faster-growing cities like Henderson or North Las Vegas, and that's just a fact of life, and that I expect that to continue. The other cities in Las Vegas may not be dealing with these issues yet. I suspect they will be, and we're going to feel them a little deeper.
So, Mr. Vincent, are we talking about people, or are we talking about percentages when you say we're not growing as fast? Percentage of growth. Some of the, particularly the CTAX formula is based upon a 5-year average of your population growth rate plus your assessed value growth rate. So those growth rates are critical in determining what share of the excess, if you will, the growth in consolidated tax we receive in Las Vegas. So those growth rates are very, very critical to us, and we're oftentimes arguing with the state over our population growth, as Margot Wheeler will attest. So those are important numbers for us. So growth rates is what's driving some of those formulas. So we have experienced in 07 and 08, the year we're in 09, we'll be seeing a growth rate of less than 2.5%. Or about 2.5% for those 3 years. Not quite a recession. It's not negative growth, but it's certainly significantly less than what we've seen in the past. I wanted to make this issue here that when we get to fiscal year 10, we're going to level off to a more normalized growth rate. Normally, you would expect, all things being equal, that our growth rate, particularly in things like retail sales, would be roughly equivalent to our population growth, plus some kind of a consumer price index or some kind of an inflation factor. And that would put us probably in the 6 to 7% growth range. And that's kind of where we see ourselves arriving at. Perhaps starting to get there in 10, certainly by 11 and 12 we should be there. John mentioned the slump lasting into at least to fiscal year 10 for us on a fiscal year basis, that yes, we have a lot of employment happening, but it is primarily going to be in service-level jobs. Those wage earnings are not going to be sufficient to drive the new home market, and we'll see that shifting to residential. And most importantly, I wanted to make sure that you understood that the budget reductions we're talking about are going to last into fiscal year 12, that we are not going to, in the current projections, we're not going to be able to replace those jobs.
Mark, Mr. Vincent?
Yes, sir.
Mayor, if you don't mind.
No, please.
Go back to the previous slide, please. Help me understand the correlation between point number 2 and the point number 5 as far as the expected temper recovery in fiscal year 10 being approximately 6 to 7%. However, the budget reductions will continue through FY12. Help me to understand the gap there, Mark.
Our wages, as you know from previous briefings, are growing around 5 to 6% per year because of our contractual increases and because of increases with respect to benefits, particularly PERS and our health benefits. So when you have revenues growing at 6 to 7% and your largest component is growing at that rate or equal, it's going to be a while before you're going to have sufficient revenue to be able to add those vacant positions back. And we're not going to see that 6 to 7% growth till fiscal years 11 or 12. So you've got to get through 9, 10, and 11 where your revenue growth is going to be significantly less than your expenditure growth, and I have a slide a little bit later, I'll show that, and it'd be a little more obvious at that time.
Okay.
But that's the issue.
Well,
We're not going to rise to 6 or 7% next year. It's not going to happen next year, and I don't expect it's going to happen in fiscal year 10 either.
If you don't mind, when you get to that slide, please point it out so that I can ask some additional questions in respect to this.
Will do.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if I could ask the question, just to clarify what Councilman Barlow said, basically what you're saying is that we're going to stay somewhat the way we are until fiscal year 10. At that time, we begin slowly growth level again until it reaches about 6 or 7, but that won't be until probably fiscal year 12,
Somewhere around 11 and 12. Right?
11 to 12.
And,
okay.
and obviously, that's a little far out for us to be predicting. It's, you know, it will be what it will be. I'm just trying to communicate to you that for the city of Las Vegas, that whatever our new level of normalized growth rate is going to be, it's probably going to be less than what Henderson and North Las Vegas are seeing. That's just going to be a fact of life. They may be seeing revenue growth closer to 10%. 9 or 10%. We'll be down below that.
And Mr. Vincent, isn't this just a mere prediction because of the economy? It can still take us down a little bit further than what we are. So would it not be fair to say that this is a prediction of where we anticipate being?
Everything beyond fiscal year 08 is a prediction, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's not necessarily a promise.
No, not for me, it isn't. Just again, to mirror some of the things that Mr. Restrepo said, we're not alone. We have briefed you, giving you some information in various other cities and counties throughout the United States that are also in some financial difficulties and are doing some significant budget reductions, in many cases layoffs. And so this is a list of those cities that we have briefed you on in the past. This is the slide that is probably causing most of our pain and suffering. This is consolidated tax. You might recall from Mr. Restrepo's slide that consolidated tax has been about 50% of our general fund revenues. It's a major component. About 84% of this is retail sales tax. And I mentioned a normal growth rate, and I will tell you, if I can find my little, that normal growth rate for us is probably right on somewhere in this range. And we asked ourselves, you know, why did we see all this growth rate going on here? And I think Mr. Restrepo talked about that a little bit. And what you saw happening was folks had some easy credit. It was easy for them to trade up. It was easy for them to get equity out of their homes. They were using that newfound equity to either buy investment properties or certainly trade up or buy new stuff, whether that be plasma TVs, cars, and whatnot. All that fueled the growth in our consolidated tax that was far less than what you would normally have expected. And what's happened is now, because of the credit crunch, if I can find myself, then you had this drop right here, and this is where we find ourselves today. We had in fact, these green bars here represent fiscal year 2007. That year actually closed the year, because of the fourth quarter, with a negative growth rate of about 0.4% in C-tax. And so far this year, we are negative in the C-tax, about 2.5%. I think someone asked me before the meeting started whether the city was in a recession, and I said I don't think the city's technically in a recession from the city revenue perspective, because our total revenues aren't negative, but C-tax is. And there is something going on with our retail sales tax right now, driven by consumer confidence, driven by the tighter credit, driven by a lot of the issues with the foreclosure and just the whole credit issue. And I don't know that we've seen all the impacts of that yet. I think there are some things that we haven't seen yet. But basically, this is the biggest driver of our financial problems at the moment.
Question. Then, mentioning recession, in your opinion as the Director of Finance, at what point would you state that the City of Las Vegas would find itself in a recession? What would be those indicators?
Well, if you go back to Mr. Restrepo's definition, it would be a year, about a year's worth of negative growth, and you're seeing that in C-tax right now. We're not seeing it yet in our gross revenues. Our growth rate in gross revenues, as I mentioned, is going to be about 2.5% for these 3 years in a row, from 7, 8, and 9. We expect our revenues to be about 2.5%. That's not negative, but it's significantly below what it was. So you might not call that a recession. Whatever it is, we have to deal with it, and it's that part's a reality. These 3 years are going to be growth rates of about 2.5% when our expenditures would normally grow at 6 to 7%, and that's what we're trying to deal with right now.
Thank you.
This is a precursor to the more detailed information I was going to give you, and you've seen these slides before. With respect to 2008, we've already taken budget cuts of $18.5 million, and that's how we're dealing with this shortfall. We actually have an operating shortfall in this current fiscal year of about $18 million, and how we're dealing with that is the cuts that we've already taken. We've already taken that action. That's going to allow us to close out the year with a fund balance of about 17%, which is a fairly healthy fund balance. But the issue then we have is 2009, the shortfall is predicted to go to $40 million. Couple things have happening. We're not seeing sales tax. We're not seeing the sales tax recover. In fact, we're actually predicting that 2009 will be slightly less than 2008. The other thing that we're seeing, which again dovetails to what Mr. Restrepo was talking about, we are starting to see impacts in property tax. Property taxes are other significant revenue components, about 25% of our general fund revenues. And we've already seen in the areas of personal property that inventories and the replacement of equipment and fixtures and automobiles is decreasing, and we're seeing significant reductions in the area of personal property tax revenues. The real property tax revenues haven't yet taken a hit. I expect to see some of that in 2009 and a little bit more of that in fiscal year 10. The reality is if there's not as much residential construction, if in fact the rental market would take that place, it waits to be seen whether that will happen or not. But right now we're kind of watching what's going to happen with the property tax. I think it's going to be, as Mr. Restrepo said, a little delayed reaction. In 2009, we are looking at not only now dealing with budget cuts of $20.6 million, but we're now having to draw down the fund balance of about $20 million, and that's how we're dealing with that $40 million. So we're carrying our budget cuts into 2009. In other words, we're not refunding or putting money back for all the vacant positions that we're dealing with. And we're also going to have to draw down that fund balance, and that fund balance gets us down to about a 12.9% fund balance, which is still within our current budget policy. But again, carrying this forward a little bit, we've taken a model that we've used for capital project planning, our 5-year capital plan, and we're now applying it to what's happening here in our general fund, and we've been using it as a tool. And we're now predicting that our budget cuts will top out, I've got to find my cursor, a shortfall of about $47 million in 10, and then that's the bottom, and we start recovering a little bit. And you can see these growth rates here. We're looking at revenue at 4.3, revenue at 5.7. You can see we are predicting that revenue will start to come back to, as I said, a norm of probably 6 to 7% growth rate. We still have the budget cuts of $20.6 million. We've introduced in 2010 this new concept that we're going to talk about in a little bit here, the Stabilization Reserve Fund. We need $27 million to essentially balance the budget in fiscal year 10. That gets us to a fund balance of about 12.5. We essentially deplete that in 2011, and we then have to draw down $17 million, leaves us with a fund balance of about $53 million, 9%. Right there. Now that's a prediction, that's not fact, but that's kind of the way I see it happening for the time being. So we're trying to deal with fiscal year 09 with a vision towards 10 and 11. We can't, if we just looked at 09 and ignored what I think is going to be a sustained slower growth for a while, and then ultimately leveling off at a different plateau, we've got to look to the future. We just can't look currently. So one of the things we talked about in the briefings. Yep.
Yes, sir.
Mark, you're making some assumptions here as far as the expenses.
Yes.
You go 3.5 to 6 to 5.1 to 4.3. Are you going to get into some of that detail?
Yeah, I
in the
can give
presentation?
you, I'll be able to give you my assumptions here in two or three more slides. We talked about the need to create some kind of a stabilization fund because the big crunch is going to hit us in fiscal year 10 and 11. At least that's what the modeling's predicting. We think we can get through fiscal year 09 with just the $20.6 million of cuts, but we think that's problem, the fiscal problem is going to carry over into 10 and 11. And we talked about going through our capital project fund, which we have done, to identify sources of revenues that we could use. We could either defer or delay or cancel certain projects. And a couple places we're looking at some reserve funds that we know we could take in. We talked about the bid reserve, taking that in to a special fund. We also talked a little bit about the need for the atrium tenant improvements, that in fact we only had allocated $3 million for tenant improvements, and it looks like it's going to be at least $5 million, if not more, and so we allocated $2 million back for the atrium tenant improvements, and so that gave us a net $11 million roughly towards a stabilization fund. I didn't think that was going to be enough, and we talked about that a little bit. We went into some areas of we looked at our internal service funds, which predominantly collect revenues to pay for the maintenance and operations of certain things, as well as the future capital replacement of items like equipment and automobiles and computers and radios and copiers, and we thought we could defer and delay some of those capital replacement schedules, and that might net us approximately $7 million. And we also talked about looking at other sources, and these are some of those sources, those other sources we've looked at. We know that our LVCVA money that we get by agreement can be used for capital or park operating and maintenance, and we're suggesting that some of that money for 8 and for 9 and in particular 8 and 9 be used for operations as opposed to capital. Our parking enterprise fund does generate a positive cash flow primarily because of some garage rentals that we have, and that fund should be paying for as much of the debt service as it can with respect to some of the garage facilities that we built, particularly the Neonopolis garage, certainly the Paul's garage and the Stewart garage. And so it has a fund balance that it can retroactively go back and pay for a share of that debt service based upon its ability to pay. And finally, on the FSI operating, when we do the budget, when we forecast our property taxes, we forecast that 80% will go towards operating, 20% goes towards capital. Historically, since the inception of the Fire Safety Initiative, our property taxes have actually been slightly higher than what we budgeted, and that money, which is this $3.5 million, is residing in the Fire Safety Special Revenue Fund. It could be used for either operating or capital, and we're suggesting at this point that that we would put that in the stabilization fund for use in fiscal year 10 towards fire and safety operating costs. So that gets us $30 million roughly, and you can see that we're planning on using $27 million and $3 million in fiscal years 10 and 11. So that just shows you how we created the stabilization fund and where we're going to spend it. This is the detailed slide, Councilman Brown, that you were probably most curious about, and I wanted to cover a couple of things with it first. I have to change the cursor. I'm sorry, because I just cannot see this color. Oops.
Stabilization fund, that's really detailed.
That's still a little change. Okay. This slide's too white. Right here, I wanted to highlight the transfers from other funds. This is the Revenue Stabilization Fund. This is when we would plan, the years we'd plan on using it. The average growth rate in revenues for this projected 5-year period, including that $30 million, is about 5%. So the average is about 5% for that. These expenditure numbers, labor and non-labor, they already reflect the current $20.6 million reductions we've been talking about. A couple things I wanted to point out to you is this line item right there, the 08-09 vacancies. The cuts that the departments have made so far represent about 186 full-time equivalent positions. This would be the line where if I had the revenue, if we had the revenue, we would refund those positions. This speaks to what Councilman Barlow was asking. You can see there's no money being added there. This line would be where we do program expansion, non-capital improvement. If we were going to add a new program or expand existing programs, we don't have any projected revenue to do that. Capital pay-as-you-go, same thing. Sorry. This new debt service, I need to explain this. On Wednesday, you'll be hearing a presentation from Four Cities Live Work Las Vegas project. You'll be hearing a presentation on City Hall. Without stealing a whole lot of that information, although we can discuss it if you feel you need to, this plan contemplates at some future date that we would be paying the minimum deferred lease on a new City Hall, a rent, if you will, of about $2 million a year, and that would start in fiscal year 12. Sometime around the summer of 2011, that would be the start of fiscal year 12, and that's what that line represents. It doesn't actually represent debt or capital outlay. It's just a recognition that there'd be some lease payment out there that we'd have to absorb. And finally, this bottom line represents operations and maintenance expenditures and utility expenditures relative to capital projects that we already have funded and in process. And you'll see a slide later. We still have almost $1.5 billion of capital projects that are on our books that are funded and will continue. And when those come into operations, there are operating impacts, and that's what this line represents. And so the big issue is this is the excess or the shortfall. And the only reason why there's a positive number in 08 is because of that $27 million right there. If it wasn't for that, we'd be looking at a budget deficit for several years, and you can see the good news is starting in 11 and 12 and 13, that deficit starts to get smaller. And again, this is just a forecast. It's not, it's just a prediction. And so we're very confident about the 9 and 10 numbers, the 11, 12, and 13. That'll just depend on how quickly the economy recovers. It can depend on a lot of other factors. It could just as easily go south, perhaps, if some catastrophic event happens, but it could just as easily go the other side as well. But this is our best projection. As far as some of the numbers, Councilman Brown, you were asking me, with respect, if I can just throw these out for you, with respect to the C-Tax, we see the C-Tax leveling off to about a 7% growth rate, but we don't see that until fiscal year 12. I have property tax, which has historically been right at 10% for the last 10, 12 years. We're kind of predicting that's going to drop off to 6 or 7% in 9 and 10, and then gradually get back up to 10% maybe by fiscal year 11. Some of the other license and other revenues are small numbers, as Mr. Restrepo mentioned, the law of big numbers. There probably counts here. They're not going to grow significantly, but they're only 25% of our budget. With respect to labor, because of the cost cuts we took, we're seeing in fiscal year 09 our labor budget, and that labor budget includes fringe benefits for us, so it includes the major pieces of benefits, which would be obviously our PERS contributions, our paid absences, and our health benefits. We're showing a 4.5% growth in fiscal year 09 because of the cuts, but we see that leveling off to about 5.9% thereafter. In the non-labor, I have a nominal 3% growth rate for that, just for consumer price type of budget. So what you see is the forecasted revenue for 09, including, for 09 would be 2.1. In fiscal year 10, without the transfers in, that revenue growth would go to 4.3%. In fiscal year 11, a 5.7 revenue growth, 5.8, and then 6.7 by 12, and that's, again, just a forecast. But I believe, for all the reasons that Mr. Restrepo mentioned and the uniqueness of Las Vegas, that that it's going to be a couple of years before we start to see it rebound, and when it rebounds, it may rebound a little bit slower and go to a different plateau than we've seen in the past. This is a graph that depicts the combination of our fund balances, which are over on this scale over here, in terms of millions of dollars. That's the blue bar, and the red line represents the weeks of coverage that fund balance represents. And let me explain what that means. If you were to take our total operating expenditures and divide them by our fund balance, that you would come up with a percentage, 12%, 15%, whatever it is. You would apply that percentage to the number of weeks in a year, 52 weeks. So a 10% fund balance covers 5.2 weeks of operation. The city, just like any other business or any other operation, has to have working capital to cover its normal expenditures. None of us operate our bank account to a zero balance when we get paid, hopefully, because it's a very dangerous way to live. We don't know. We always have a need for some reserve. For example, in our case, the C-tax distribution, which again is 50% of our general fund revenues, we don't see the C-tax distribution till 2 months after the fact. So we have to wait 2 months after the sale has taken place before we see that revenue. So we have to have roughly 8 weeks of coverage on that. So we think a 10%, currently our policy is 12%, which is about 6.25 weeks, is a healthy and a decent policy. But the problem we're suffering with is that, based on our projections, before we dealt with the rate stabilization fund, we were going to have 4 years in a row where the number of weeks coverage would be less than 10%, less than 5.2 weeks, which we think is a dangerous situation, both from us on an operating perspective, certainly would have negative impacts on our bond ratings and our future ability to borrow money. With the revenue stabilization fund, you notice that we've solved these issues, and the problem gets pushed out to 12 and 13, which is a little bit farther away, and we have time to plan and react for fiscal years 12 and 13. So we're buying, the rate stabilization fund is a fund that we're creating with one-time monies. It's not being replenished unless we establish a policy about how we're going to replenish that. But it's one-time money. It's not a recurring revenue source, and so it solves our problem in years 10 and 11, and it pushes it out to 12 and 13, which gives us a little more time to plan for that, and also gives the economy a little more time to go through its throes and enter into recovery. And if that recovery comes quicker than we thought, then obviously our performance here would be better than we were predicting. I wanted to talk a little bit about the cuts. As you know, that what we did is we did an across-the-board cut to start with in 08 and then in 09, but we know that across-the-board cuts just don't work. And so we had certain departments push back a little bit and told us that, well, if for us to make these sorts of cuts, we're talking about taking units out of service, endangering public safety and those sorts of things, and of course that's not what we wanted to do. This is a ranking of the cuts in terms of the percentage that the cut was. And I point out to you that detention and enforcement, just by way of explanation, it's not that they didn't submit cuts, they in fact did, but they have 3 large contracts that are going up substantially. One being the contract with the Animal Foundation, which is going to cost us upwards of $1 million, over $1 million a year in expenses for that, as well as our inmate medical and food costs are also, those contracts are also going up. So it's not that they didn't submit cuts, they did, but they had some contractual obligations that were going up faster than those cuts. Obviously, we didn't cut anything in the police services as Metro. There was no cut there. So it gives you an idea of what those look like. Let me just highlight business development. That cut was attributed to our ability to take the economic development portion of OBD and now fund that entirely out of the redevelopment agency. And so that's how that came about. If you were to...
Your Honor, if I may.
Yes, please.
Mr. Vincent, fire and rescue there. You can pull that chart back up.
Yep.
Describe for us.
This one right here?
Yeah. Just tell us what that's all about, please.
I have some slides that I'm coming up to that we can go over that in a little more detail, but just sneaking ahead.
That's fine, Your Honor.
It's
Wait. We'll wait.
Okay. All right. This is that same data categorized in terms of functional areas. So you can see public safety essentially got a very nominal cut, whereas economic assistance, public works, cultural and recreation got the larger cuts. Now, public works seems a little strange that would have such a large cut, but if you remember from the briefings, what we were doing there was instead of outsourcing a lot of our engineering type work, we were doing that in-house. And so that cuts there is primarily in the contractual area of professional services. So we're sacrificing the professional service cuts in order that we can have the resources to do that and do those services internally. So even though we did a 3.5% net cut, it wasn't across the board. That's the point I was trying to make here, is that everybody felt a little pain, but we certainly took a graded approach. Citywide, again, $20.6 million. I mentioned the 186 equivalent positions. Those aren't specific positions. That's just the number of hours that we're going to be missing from our labor force equates to about 186 positions. We've made the decision that there will be no executive salary adjustments, and that appointive salary adjustments would be likely limited to a form of COLA.
Excuse me, Mayor Goodman.
Yes.
Could you just, for our viewing public, Mark, define some of those terms? When you say no executive salary adjustments and limited appointive, whatever that was, and before it left the screen. Here, I've got it right here.
Talking about these
Limited
two here?
appointive salary adjustments, those two things. Could you break that down for us?
Sure. For our appointive and executive salaries, we have a different compensation plan. These are employees that are not represented by a bargaining unit. With the executives, there is a budget that historically is established for their awards, and executives do not receive COLA. In the past, they have received a merit adjustment for performance and a bonus for performance.
Okay, would you tell our listening audience who are the executives, what qualifies, and what is a COLA?
Okay. The executives are going to be our managers and above. So you're essentially talking about division managers or office managers, deputy directors, directors, and the city manager's office. That's the predominant group. There are some other nuances, but those are the executives.
And how many city employees fall under that umbrella?
Probably a little over 70 out of about 3,000 full and part-time.
You said that they will not be receiving a COLA. That's a cost of living allowance?
They have never received a cost of living allowance in the past, or I shouldn't say they never. Since I've been here, they've not. I think at one time they may have, but not since I've been here. A cost of living allowance, it's easier to talk about the appointives. The appointives have much more compression between their classifications and the represented employees. The represented employees, those bargaining units have in their agreements bargain negotiated cost of living increases that happen usually on the cycle of the fiscal year. And historically, the appointives have received that same COLA that the Las Vegas City Employee Association has received. I think there was one year where they received less than the LVCVA received, and then it was restored a little while later. But they typically receive the same cost of living as the LVCEA employees. The thought is we would continue that, but on top of that COLA, the appointees also had a pool of money that was established for the recognition of performance based upon with an award of a merit adjustment, which is an adjustment to the salary, or a bonus, which is a one-time award that is not subject to PERS or any other benefits. That's the portion that we're talking about, eliminating both for the executives and the appointees. The merit and the bonus portion of their compensation package would be eliminated for this summer's actions, and that only the appointees would get a cost of living increase.
Thank you. I wanted to take this opportunity, and I've discussed this with some of my colleagues, that this council voted in raises for the city council men and women, as well as the mayor, that go into effect at our next terms. And I believe it's wards 2, 4, and 6 that are up for re-election next year. And whomever is going to be council persons for those wards would be eligible for the raises. I'm only speaking for myself right now. But in order to set an example and to share in the burden, I've decided that so long as we're in this economic situation where our executive salary persons are not going to accept these adjustments and our appointive salary persons are not going to receive these adjustments, and as long as we're laying off employees with the City of Las Vegas, I'm speaking for myself, I will not be accepting the raise that this council voted in until we see a turnaround.
In Your Honor, if I may.
Yes.
And to add to that, Mr. Vincent, should I be reelected to another term to serve here on the City of Las Vegas City Council, I will not accept that increase in my salary either until such time the city is on its feet and economically viable.
Very good.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I think we just better make it clear that Councilman Barlow and I are not up for election. So, there's nothing we can give up.
Amen.
Oh, no, that's not true. You know, I did want to be specific, and that's why, Councilwoman, I talked about wards 2, 4, and 6, and I was only talking about myself.
And I'll bind the next mayor, whoever the next mayor is. I assure him that he will, or her, will get the full salary that we voted upon, since it's a full-time job and the person's going to have to make a living doing that full-time and will not have any outside source of income. So this will not apply to the new mayor.
The other thing on the slide that I wanted to point out was the last bullet, that we're talking about overtime, no special events in overtime. That's been a huge issue for many of the departments. We also are looking at 100% cost recovery on non-city events. We do have some events that they use our assets, or we in some way sponsor that, and oftentimes there is some cost associated with that, and we want to get 100% cost recovery. And then finally, we also want to eliminate all the fee waivers for the use of our facilities and assets. We think that those waiver fees should also be eliminated.
Councilman?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mark, what's the time frame on this chart?
Some of these have actually, some of the overtime issues have already taken into effect, but generally, most of what we're talking about today, we're talking about fiscal year 2009, so starting in the summer.
So that,
But some of the overtime has already been cut back in some departments.
so we're saying that for the remainder of this fiscal year and in its entirety next year, we're looking at 186 positions, or the equivalent to, as part of that plan? And is that that we freeze all positions, or does the position request process, is that still in effect?
No, we have not. The PJC is still in effect. We have not frozen all positions. The reference to the vacancy management plan on that second bullet, excuse me, what we asked departments to do when we gave them the target budget, we didn't tell them, how to meet it. We just said, this is the new target. You've got to demonstrate to us how you're going to meet it. In some cases, they identified positions that they felt they could keep vacant for 6 months or 9 months or even a year, but ultimately they wanted to fill it. Our requirement was, fine, if you feel you need to fill a position sometime in the middle of 2009, you still have to demonstrate to me that the savings that you generated from that can carry forward in the future years. And so they, through the position justification committee, we will continue to monitor the vacancy plan so that if they are asking us to fill a position that was specified to be vacant for a period of time, we're going to ask them to tell us how they're going to continue to meet that savings in the future year, again, as long as this economic condition exists, we're going to have to monitor that pretty closely.
Does that include full-time versus hourly? Is it all thrown into the same 186 positions?
There are, the hourly positions aren't managed quite the same in the PJC as the full-time. The hourly positions, historically, we have provided a budget, a dollar budget. We don't actually look at the filling of hourly, like the summer hires for certain programs. We give them a dollar budget, which we have reduced over the years, and they know that they have to hit that target because you're talking hundreds and hundreds of positions that pop open for the summer months and then
But are
go
those
away.
included in the
The equivalencies are, yes.
Perhaps if you could, I'd like to see a greater breakout of that one bullet item, whenever it's possible.
Okay, we'll do our best to do that.
Your Honor, if I may.
Yes, certainly.
Mr. Vincent, on the last bullet point there, also, the no fee waivers, I have a printout from, if you could be more descriptive as to what you mean by that. I've got a printout from Leisure Services for uses on our facilities, and it's been, I would imagine over the past several years, many council members and allow those waivers to occur in their certain wards. I'm having a hard time. I don't see a problem, and we may be limited by law that says we can't be a for-profit city. I know we're not, but we almost need to be, so we're not dealing with these kind of issues when there's an economic downfall. But be more descriptive, if you would, on those wavering fees, if you could for me.
I'll do my best. Just to distinguish it a little bit from the 100% cost recovery, to the extent where we have certain fees that are established to help us defray the costs of an event, whether it might be the rental of a facility, we need to make sure that the rates that we establish for those rentals of those facilities are in fact 100% cost recovery. Otherwise, we're losing money. There are other places where we charge fees that aren't necessarily based upon a cost recovery. They're just an established fee. It's just a revenue generator. And in those cases, sometimes those fees get waived. They're not necessarily a cost associated, but they're a lost revenue for us. And that's specifically what I'm talking about with the fee waivers here. Any fees that we charge that are intended to be a recovery or a reimbursement for our costs, those fees need to be made sure that we're 100% cost recovery, and then we want to make sure in all cases that we're not waiving them.
Your Honor, if I may again, I wanted to bring that out because we're often asked to waive fees from a lot of organizations throughout this city, and of course we want to help them to be successful, especially with their events. But at this time period, taking a look at these numbers from Leisure Services and the waiver of fees, it doesn't add up to a whole lot of money, but it's still significant in regards to revenue.
I think it was over 60,000 or so.
It is. I'm looking at 70,000, almost 71,000. So that's important to note. I just wanted to make sure that the public was aware of that, and anyone watching this program today understands that. I often get asked to waive fees at Parks and Ward 6 for functions and events, and I'm hard-pressed to tell them, but I won't do it. It costs the taxpayer money.
That's right.
And we've got to recover that. So thank you, Mr. Vincent.
I'm going to spend a little time in a little more detail. Again, there's a couple of caveats. This is a summarized version of the detail that you have already been briefed on. This should look very similar in a sense to the budget cut impact sheets that we've already provided you. I've summarized them to get them on these slides so they're a little more workable. In those briefings, there were a couple of areas that we were asked to take a look at. And when I get to those areas, I'll stop there and let you know remind you what you asked us to look at and a little bit of where we're at. Let me just point out that on the city manager's, the city mayor and council budget, you all participated in the reduction just like everybody else, and for that I thank you very much. We know that from previous history that we still expect you
to come in less than this revised budget target, so there's some opportunity there. Hold that thought when we get to some of the other items that you've asked us to take a look at in terms of senior meals and a few other things. I don't think there's anything extraordinary here, although I will tell you that I did go to the Audit Committee meeting of this week, and I know that while the $116,000 cut that was submitted is not a lot of money, I know that the Audit Committee was asking that we take a look at that again to see if there's some way to restore some of those items, if not all of them. The internal audit does not have any vacant positions. They have no vacancy savings. All the positions are filled, and so these cuts are predominantly coming out of the area of certain outside services, be it a professional service agreement for extra auditing help on their audit schedule, as well as a part-time hourly position to help them on the clerical side. So I just mentioned that.
Did you get the PowerPoint that was presented to the Audit Committee?
I have the PowerPoint that was presented, and I did talk to Brad Snelding, and I asked him if, when he got a chance, if he would account for me, because I didn't take notes at that particular meeting, if he could account for me what all those changes were, and that then we would bring it back to you, and if you wanted to give us direction to work towards that number. Obviously, this is like a balloon. We push it in, something else pops out, but I think I think we can find a way to juggle our budget to accommodate that if that's what the council wants us to do.
Thank you.
So I will work with Rad on that issue as well.
Yes.
Mark, let me ask you this question. It's just kind of a general question. I know some governments oftentimes offer some of their higher-paid employees buyouts. And the thinking behind that, as I understand it, is that it will cost government less because they can fill that position with a lesser position. But on the one hand, the government has to buy that employee out. So it's more expensive in the short run, but less expensive in the long run. Is there anything that we could do like that, where we don't necessarily buy this expensive employee out up front, where we can offer them some sort of payment plan over time? So we reap the benefit by having a less costly employee take that position, if you will, but not get hurt up front so hard by paying out that lump sum in the beginning.
A couple of thoughts. First of all, we have offered incentives in the past. Typically what we found, and we haven't been creative in terms of deferring any of that. Basically what we typically offered is a lump sum cash or some PERS credits. And what we have found historically is that we typically have to leave those positions vacant for about 6 months in order to recover the extra costs of the incentive. To defer it over some other period is a different twist, and frankly I haven't had a chance to talk with Human Resources about how that would be structured and whether or not that it would be a liability that we'd have to recognize in the front end, even though it may be deferred over time. The other issue is selectivity. Usually when you offer incentives, you offer them to a classification or a group. You don't typically offer them to specific individuals. So sometimes you get unintended consequences that someone who didn't want goes, and so sometimes the people you were targeting don't go, and you necessarily can't force them out because you're typically targeting a class or a group of employees. You certainly could do it by position or some other methodology, but you usually don't do it by specific person.
I think it might be something, because the purpose of today is a workshop.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we can, it's this process is an evolution. It's changing and will keep changing. It just might be something for us to look at over time and see if it can be beneficial to the city.
I apologize for not having done a little more work on that before now, but I hadn't forgotten your question. These are your three administrative functions, and I don't think what you're going to see, the theme through here predominantly is going to be with more vacancies means processing the things is going to be a little slower, particularly records requests or requests for information. The people that would normally do that
that's going to take a little longer time. The other theme you're going to see consistent through here is the absence of overtime means that our ability to do functions, whether you call them special events or what have you, after hours and on weekends is diminished. And so that's the impact. You're going to see that theme through most of these slides. So predominantly in administrative areas, you're going to see perhaps slower response times. We've already talked about business development. Municipal court's going to see some impacts, not only in the longer counter time wait, but we're also looking at the overtime impacts in the pre-trial, whether or not people are able to be released OR or ended up in the jail. That's something that needs to be kind of worked through, I think, a little bit more. Here's an area that we talked about in briefings, neighborhood cleanups. The proposal submitted by Neighborhood Services was to cut back from approximately 30 neighborhood cleanups a year to about 12. And when we were asked to take a look at that, I recognize that some areas, particularly vacant property, areas that have a lot more vacant property, tend to accumulate quite a bit of trash and some substantial amounts. I think there's one particular neighborhood where historically we removed 95 tons of trash. That's really significant. And so the concern here was there's a way for us to keep the program viable, but still be able to cut out the overtime. And in meeting with leisure services, neighborhood services and field ops, let me share a little bit of information for you. With respect to neighborhood services, most of their cost was overtime. A lot of these cleanups are happening usually on the weekends, sometimes after hours, but mostly on the weekends. And their cost for overtime is about $35,000 annually. That wasn't too significant. But field operations, because of the cost of labor, the equipment, hauling out to the dump, Apex dump, and the tipping fees we have to pay, for every day, it's about $7,500 per day. The average cost for 30 cleanups a year is about $136,000. So total, it's about $171,000.
Your Honor, can I stop him right there for a minute? Explain to me again, you described these neighborhood cleanups, cleaning up several thousand tons of trash off someone's land, am I correct?
Generally, yes, it's someone's land.
Someone owns the dirt, am I correct?
Yes.
Excuse me, it's not on the someone's land, though, is it? Isn't it in front of someone's house that they put it out in front? It's not on private property, not the ones I'm familiar with.
Mayor, Council, this is Orlando.
Yes.
Councilwoman Tarkanian is absolutely right. This is a neighborhood gathering where we get the buy-in from the neighborhoods to clean up their backyards, build the neighborhood back up, and have them empowered to clean their own their own neighborhoods. But it's basically just a building of neighborhoods and trying to establish the older neighborhoods so they can become self-sufficient and bring up to the standards of the city.
And Your Honor, if I may?
Yes.
Orlando, that was a perfect explanation of what a neighborhood cleanup is. I was a little confused. I've had several neighborhood cleanups in Ward 6. We probably all have in our respective wards. I just wanted you to make clear for the public's benefit, we didn't go out and clean up tons and tons of garbage off some fellow's lot because he wouldn't do it himself. I just want to make that clear, because if that's the case, then I'd expect to see Devin standing up there saying, we're going to file liens against this property and recover these costs. That's what I'm talking about.
Right. Thank you, Orlando, for catching my
Thank you, Your
thought.
Honor.
What we have noticed, though, in talking with neighborhood service and field ops, is that over the years, this program has been around probably for over 10 years, and that as the program has been successful, it seems to evolve more and more that we're doing more of the work. And so the idea here, we've looked at a couple of things. One is we've looked at doing more of a coordination effort. We understand that I've been told that Republic Services does do large item pickup. There are certain items that they don't pick up due to hazardous materials and those sorts of things, but they do large item pickup. We thought that we could do more of a coordination effort, an education effort to have sort of a neighborhood pickup, which is more of an educational program for that particular community, to make sure that Republic knew that event was coming through that neighborhood, make sure that the neighbors knew, coordinate with them to pick up their own neighborhood. And the larger areas where we have some substantial trash, we've even gone so far as to contemplate, instead of picking it up and loading it ourselves, that we might be better off to pay a dumpster fee or several dumpsters and have them parked out in the neighborhood for a few days or a weekend, let the neighbors throw their large items into that, and then pay Republic to haul that away. The bottom line with all that discussion is, in talking with field ops and with neighborhood services, we think that we can continue to maintain about 30 neighborhood cleanups a year, but we might structure them a little differently, we might promote them a little differently, and we might seek different partners than we have in the past. But we still think we can we think we can make the cut and still provide the services by providing it in a different fashion. So I wanted to mention that one to you specifically. Also, I'll mention, just because I know it's a hot topic, graffiti abatement. In talking with Steve Harson in Neighborhood Services, he feels that he can shift one of his vacant positions from a painter to a maintenance and be able to try to maintain not quite the 24, but close to maybe 24 to 36-hour response in graffiti. Of course, that impact will be on the maintenance side, but I know graffiti is a very visible, very high-level impact to the community, so that's something that he also was looking at from the discussions we had earlier.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
On that last one, when we had our discussion in the city manager's briefing, we brought up this graffiti abatement, and we have many citizen groups now in our neighborhood associations that would like to help do that, and even paint curbs and fire hydrants, which, as I understand, there's only one person in the city that's painting curbs. I don't know if that information is accurate, but that's what I've been told. But anyway, we have citizens who want to contribute their time and their labor to do that. But the understanding was, as I understood from Dr. Selby, that the city could provide the paint because that wasn't the expensive item. It was the labor that was expensive. Is that correct?
Yes, Councilwoman. In fact, I think a lot of what Mark's talking about is working with your offices to figure out ways to engage the neighbors in helping out and offsetting our labor costs.
I just wanted to clarify, because we have had a couple of neighborhood associations since that meeting. We have told them that the city would provide the paint if they, in an organized fashion with appropriate individuals, did the painting. And then when we went to get the paint from the city, we were told we couldn't get it. It would shoot their budget to heck. So if you could just clarify that, maybe make sure that we're doing the right thing. But I do know that you do have citizens who want to become involved, and that's one way they can do it and see the results, and it makes their neighborhood look better.
Councilman, it's my understanding that we actually do provide paint today for certain neighborhood associations to do their own graffiti removal. But I don't know how widespread it is, but it was something we obviously need to make sure we're doing in the proper way.
But you will have the paint. Are we down on record that if we tell citizens you will give them the paint? And I think it should be the same color paint for walls, that have graffiti, because then you don't end up with that patchwork. You can just use the same color again.
I think we have a 7-color palette that we use that addresses the various walls.
I
So
just wanted
there's
to
a
have
limited number of
Well, and this is a little thing to some people. In our ward, it's a big, big, big thing. And I just want it down on record that we can get the paint from the city if the labor is there. And is that correct?
We'll do our best, yes.
Well, not the best. I have to know if it's a yes or a no, because I'm telling people. We have the paint.
There's going to be some criteria that the neighborhood association will have to meet, so we know that the paint's just not going anywhere, that they've got control. But as long as that's there, we'll provide the paint.
Yeah. No, I understand that. As long as it's an organized group, appropriate group. Thank you.
Fire and rescue, this is a question that Councilman Ross asked about. Predominantly what we saw in the fire and rescue, some of it was a reduction of professional services, supplies, and travel. Probably the biggest area was the deferral of some equipment and apparatus purchases. So that's where that 2.9, they're not reducing the number of staff, we're not taking any units out of service, we're still going to run all of our stations at the same capacity we have historically.
Question, Your Honor?
Yes.
Since Chief Gammon has changed our fee structure for transport, how does that figure into this factor at all?
That revenue
That revenue has already been considered in that other line right there. Oops, this other line right here. Part of that jump from 62 to 65.8, that revenue's in there already. And detention enforcement, again, I explained that they did make some cuts. They are eliminating the recertification program. They're, again, cutting back overtime is the big issue that they're doing, and some reduction in office hours for the operation hours for animal control from 6 to 9. Public Works, I mentioned predominantly overtime, and again, taking, a lot of their savings is going to be on contractual savings by taking on more of the engineering services internally and doing that, staffing that with internal resources. But again, we're probably going to see some delays in responses in some areas. Field operations in parks and open spaces is obviously it's a product of how many acres of parks and how many square feet of centers we have. Again, they're talking about cutting down on some of their overtime. They're reducing their overseeding program to 50%. The concept there is they would rotate the overseeding through the various parks and all the wards, but they're looking at a 50% reduction in general. No holiday overtime, so they have minimum holiday coverage. Things of that nature is what you're going to see. And streets and maintenance, streets and sanitation maintenance, the same thing again. You'll notice a continued theme in some of these areas, like, unless reimbursed, that's going to be difficult for them to respond to requests. Some of those are special event requests because they don't have the overtime in their budget to respond to those things, and that's the driver there. And leisure services is an area I want to talk about. We, on the meal programs, we had quite a bit of discussion about. The benefit and the need for the meal programs for seniors, and we again met with leisure services to kind of go through the plan, and in reviewing the East Las Vegas, the Doolittle, the Las Vegas Senior, and the doula programs, and looking at the revenue and the costs associated with those programs, it nets out after revenue. There's a revenue of about $20 million and expenditures of about $50 million. That's a net loss of about $30 million. We could easily keep those programs in place. A thought that I don't know who it was that threw. What did I say? I'm sorry. I'm exhausted. Let me rephrase that. Revenue about $20,000 and expenditures of about $50,000 for a net of about $30,000. I'm sorry. Which doesn't seem like a lot of money, but again, leisure services, when they went through their program, they have a lot of little cuts in a lot of areas that you can see amounts to almost $2.3 million. So every little bit counts. It's kind of like what Doug was saying earlier, is any idea, anything we can do, it helps. But in this particular case, because the senior meals was such an important issue, if the council would allow us, we're looking at ways that we think we can fund that 30. One idea, and I mentioned that you have, I think there's plenty of room in your mayor council budget to pay for this $30,000. That would be something that I don't think you would feel the impact of, and that might be a very easy way to keep the meal program going. So I mentioned that as a possibility. But in either case,
Mayor Pro Tem.
Well, I was told at the East Las Vegas Community Center, where they have the senior meals that were right next to the school district bus yard, and all of a sudden they found out about it. So most of those people that are utilizing this are now employees of the school district getting a cheap lunch.
It's my understanding that they are senior citizens, and they came in and they joined, and they've got their senior citizen membership, and they're online, and that's what I understand. And I understand it was a significant increase in the number of meals that we were serving.
Well, I wasn't under the understanding that they was senior bus drivers or senior maintenance workers. I just understand they was bus drivers.
and it's my understanding they do qualify as senior citizens. They just happen to also be employees of the Clark County School District.
Mayor?
Yes, sir, Councilman.
I had an opportunity to meet with the seniors over at the Las Vegas Senior Center, and they shared with me that the discontinuation of the Hamburger Tuesday that they currently enjoy, they were saddened to hear that it's on the verge of possibly going away. And some of the comments that they shared with me were that, this is an opportunity for not only for them to get together to fraternize, but to actually have a very important meal to them, being that for a lot of them, this was the biggest meal of the day. So I would like to request and encourage staff to assist me in possibly pulling from another angle versus to take away the opportunity of these seniors who, in fact, this is very important to them for their livelihood. And it's something that I'm looking forward to working with staff on to possibly see if there's another corner we can take from versus taking from the seniors at this particular senior center.
Again, all three of these bullets total about $30,000 net of revenue. So I think there's something we can do here. We just have to work together, figure it out. But I just want to put on the record that while these were some of the original cuts, we've got direction from you, at least in the briefings, to see if there's a way we can fund that through cutting something else, and I think there is, and we'll figure that out.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Could I just ask you, on the theme meal events, are you talking about the reduction that we did this year would stay in place, or are we going to reduce more than we did this year?
I think
Because we did reduce
it's the
this year.
former. I think it's a reduction that we put in place will continue.
The reduction we've gone through this year will continue?
Will continue.
So we're not talking about any more, it's what
No.
we have. Thank you.
Many of the reductions you're going to see in the rest of the slides have to do with reductions in schedules. And I know there was very much concern about pools. Again, the theme of seniors is important, and making sure they have the proper nutrition. A lot of these folks are on fixed incomes that have to really be struggling. We had a similar theme with summer pools, the issue that our youth in the summer having some place to go to enjoy themselves, but probably more importantly to perhaps stay out of trouble in an organized fashion, to be able to have something that they can do that would occupy them for the summer. And so we were asked to take a look at that. We have met with and worked with Leisure Services. They have proposed a whole new set of schedules that aren't reflected in any of these slides that essentially would allow us to keep more of these facilities open certainly on Saturdays and some on Sundays, that will have reduced hours, but at least they still will be open and they'll be operating on those days. And so what I would suggest is that perhaps between now and our final budget hearing, that we work with you on those schedules and share those with you and work through those. But I think it was a rational approach, and they tried to look at it from the perspective of coverage, with the idea of taking to heart what you said to them about the youth needing a place to gather and organize and have some fun on the weekends as well.
Mayor Goodman. Yes. I know that we had talked about putting out an announcement that some of these cuts would go into effect at some of our facilities April 6th, I think, is what it was. Are we talking about maybe suspending that and reviewing what you're talking about,
I'm
Mark?
not sure. I haven't talked to BG about suspending it, but certainly it would be, my understanding from what I've seen, it would be a change. So either we have to suspend or we'd have to make a revised announcement.
I know one of the pools affected by a potential closure is in my ward, the Veterans Memorial Pool. So I'd ask that we look at this sooner rather than later. I mean, I don't think you meant to wait until just before our next budget meeting, but as far as the pool that's in my ward, I'd be very willing to sit down with you, Mark, and look at it.
I happen to have the schedule that I got from yesterday, and I can tell you, for example, currently Veterans operates 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Friday. And we're talking about shortening those hours to be 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and then Friday 8 a.m. to 8 p.m.
And then it's currently open Saturday from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., and we're talking now about shortening those hours from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. So it would stay open the same number of days, but the hours would be shortened a little bit. And you'll see that, when you see this schedule, you'll see that that's pretty much the case that they've done across the board, tempered by attendance numbers.
Councilor Ross?
Thank you, Your Honor. Grateful to Leisure for that, because it's challenging for us as a city to weigh what's going to occur should we trim the hours for these centers, these pools where these kids are going to hang out. We want them to be engaged in healthy social activities and not out there on the streets causing a ruckus or spray painting our buildings, and that's the idea. So it just occurred to me that how do we as government, keep that balance of keeping those services available to the youth in our community. But I think Leisure stepped up to the plate and did a great job at reviewing this.
I guess, Councilman Wilson, to your question, I guess I would suggest that we get the schedule to you tomorrow or today, this afternoon or tomorrow, and we begin to work on that as soon as possible. But my general feeling when I looked at it, I think most of you would be satisfied that at least we're trying to extend the service as much as we can and still meet our organizational overtime cuts.
Member Tom?
Yes, also, on one of my pools, Councilman Wilson brought it up, but how many people do we have at the pool at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. in the morning?
I see Dr. Jackson maybe...
Yeah, I'm talking about the school-age kids.
I don't know if I can answer that question, but Ms. Jackson might.
Good afternoon, I'm sorry. Mayor Pro Tem, yes?
Yes. How many students do we have using the pool at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. in the morning?
Don't know that I have that particular number right on me. I do...
Rather, to me, in my pool, I'd rather have them opening like from 10 in the morning or 11 in the morning until maybe 5 or 6 at night or something.
Well, I do know, not to interrupt Dr. Jackson, but I do know that we do have swim teams, Mayor Pro Tem, that utilize the pools at 6 a.m., such as I know at Dula, swim teams have come there in the morning from whether it be the university or out of state or in-state swim teams as well. So I'm not sure if that
I guess
answers this question.
what I would ask of you, counsel, to help me understand is philosophically what it is you're saying to me. Are you saying, in addition to the pool discussion, we've already at one point had a discussion about the center hours. Are you saying that you do not want to see centers closed on Sundays, which we've already noted in our 2008 decrement plan?
All I was suggesting was...
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
All I was suggesting was that if you're going to rearrange the hours, and again, Mark's saying that we're going to be briefed on these individually, and so I guess I could say, give my remarks at that time, but I'm just thinking that if Ricky and his Doolittle, he wants to open it early or whatever, I'm just saying I don't know anybody that's going to go down to my pools and I got 2 pools, that are going to go there at 6 o'clock in the morning. I don't know. Maybe
I understand. I understand what you're saying. I'm sorry.
I'm willing to give up hours, just which ones we give up.
In the plan that we have come up with, which could work provided that funding is found for it, we are able to shift our hours to accommodate the most hours of swim time. And so those early hours, depending upon if it, like you said, if it's a private team, those are pretty much the ones that use it in the very early hours. The hours that we have suggested in the plan that you will eventually see are hours that are most frequented by your customer base at Martinez Pool or Muni Pool or Doolittle Pool or wherever.
And again, Dr.
So we have taken the highest use hours into consideration.
Well, I certainly appreciate that, but I've seen some figures also, where some of the services was going to be cut out on Sundays, and I seen the uses during the week. Then on Sundays there's nobody there.
That's true, and that was the Sunday closure.
You close them on Sundays in my ward.
We as a department just want to make sure we're clear that the understanding is that the centers will stay closed on Sundays. Is that correct? Okay.
As far as I'm concerned.
Thank you.
Well, yes, I agree with the centers staying closed on Sundays, but one thing I do want to point out is in the information that I received in regards to the West Las Vegas Arts Center, it showed where we had an average of 9 people attending the West Las Vegas Arts Center on Sunday, and I know that's not true. The Arts Center has a very good population of individuals that come through and utilize that facility. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clarified on the record, although it did not reflect that in the paperwork that I received.
And respectfully, I would say to you that there are times when our numbers, if people come in to us as a group, would not necessarily, it would not be what you see reflected on paper. What is happening is people who come in as a group are counted as a group. Quite frankly, I will say to you, the companion side to whatever number you see, Councilman, all of you, is that there is a considerable amount of staff time and investment that goes into keeping a center open on a day when it's not heavily populated. And the consideration that the department took was one of over an average, not just one particular Sunday where we may see a large attendance. What we try to do is to average it out over the course of the Sundays. And Sunday is just historically a slower day in leisure. And it's a national statistic, not just in ours. But it's not something that I'm going to debate because I know that you have seen larger numbers on certain Sundays. But as an aggregate over a course of a year, when we look at the larger numbers and we're talking about the staff investment that goes into it, materials and all of it, it's just been our recommendation that if we had to look at a cut, a Sunday afternoon would be a better alternative.
Let me ask you this question also, Dr. Jackson. What have we done to the employees who in the past have worked in the centers? Have we placed them throughout the week, or what do we do with those individuals?
Where we can accommodate, for the most part, the Sunday employees are hourly. They're not full-time employees. They are hourly, and where we can accommodate them through the week, we will. But if there are reduced hours, that is the nature of their work, to work when we have work for them. And so they may see a significant cut in their hours. They could see a cut in their hours, and we'll try to balance that among the hourlies that we have.
Okay. But for those full-time employees, speak on that for me, please.
Again, the people who are in the centers on Sundays predominantly are hourly employees.
Right. But for those who are full-time in the centers, what are we doing with them? Because I know that there are some full-time employees that I've seen that work on Sunday.
They'll have their full complement of hours as according to their contracts, because all of them are contractually bound. They will continue to receive work, and we'll balance that workload for them.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilman.
I wanted to make sure I understood this correctly. When you're starting at 6, it's my understanding that at that time you begin things like the swim teams, swim instruction, the water ballet lessons and things like that, and then after a certain time it's open to the general public.
Yes.
I mean, that is the public.
Yes.
But is there a way we could get information as to if the pools are being used for that at 6, or if they're not, then I could see where you wouldn't need those early hours.
Unless my Aquatics and Recreation Division Manager wants to correct me, it's my understanding that the early morning hours are predominantly for the use by swim teams.
And so every swimming pool we have, you do have this? Because if you didn't have a swimming pool that had these lessons and everything, you could then move those hours back, as Councilman Reese talked about.
This is Bill Tyler, our Recreation Division Manager.
Hi. Your question is, do we have people in at 6 a.m. that are not swim team participants or master swim?
What I'm saying is, why do you open at 6 when we know that almost certainly the age where we're having youth who have difficulties is starting in junior high, and they usually sleep in the summer, for example, or something. Why you begin at 6? And I'm saying at each of your swimming pools, then, if you begin at 6, is it because it's being used by a swimming team or aquatics or water ballet or whatever?
Yes, swim
So
team.
every single swimming pool we have has those there, and then it's open to the public?
After that, yes.
I mean, I consider those the public. I'm not saying they're not the public. I'm just trying to say, because if you had a pool that you did not have these teams, then you wouldn't have to open as early. That's
That would
all.
be correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
It's
And
my,
if-
it's- go ahead, sorry.
Well, and then you could find that out, how many show up for that 6 o'clock swimming,
Yes.
if you didn't have it. But you're saying all your swimming pools do have it.
Yes, they do.
Okay.
It's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the swim teams are paying a substantial fee to use the pool,
That is correct.
and that would offset, would it not, whatever expenses the city has in order to get those employees down there at that hour?
It will pay for the employees, Mayor, but it doesn't typically pay for things like if the pool is heated, and some of these pools are even heated in the summer, if I understand correctly, some are.
I see.
And so the utility cost to heat the pools is the
I see.
far and away the greatest cost.
And that keeps on going up as well?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Continuing with leisure, again, we've been talking about the pool hours and the rec hours. A couple things I wanted to bring to your attention that are along the lines of the Mayor's Cup soccer tournament. We've talked about finding a nonprofit. For example, it could be somebody like the Downtown Soccer Club to run the Mayor's Cup, as long as we had some oversight or some involvement to make sure there's continuity and that was well organized. And I think that we can do that. Corporate challenge, we've talked about increasing fees to ensure 100% cost recovery. It is because many of the businesses that are suffering through this economic times as we are, it's possible that some businesses may not want to participate. So if we don't get participation that supports it, we might want to suspend the event. But we're talking about 100% cost recovery there. By the way, I believe that would be close to a 60% increase in the entry fees for the corporate challenge in order for it to be cost recovery.
Mr. Vincent, what is the cost incurred by the City of Las Vegas for corporate challenge?
I might have that number handy. I think I have the leisure portion, but I don't have the others. But I think it's got to be. Lonnie might have it.
Is it more than your salary, Mr. Zimmerman?
Yes, significantly more. The cost, Councilman Barlow, is $220,000 total. That's with staff and hourly wages. The revenue is roughly $160,000, so we have about an $80,000 deficit for the corporate challenge experience.
Thank you, sir.
And we previously in the briefings talked about the Tennis Channel Open. We talked about making the venue available, but not putting them on notice that we would not be providing any in-kind or city funding for the event. And then there are also some miscellaneous programs as well. And again, the theme throughout this is reducing the overtime, reducing some of the part-time staff where we can, throughout all these schedules.
Question, Mr. Vincent.
Mm-hmm.
What is the cost that the city puts forth as far as the Tennis Channel Open?
Our cash contributions for the tournament, I believe, are $600,000, and there's approximately another $100,000 to $150,000 that are in-kind support that we provide. Which, when I say in-kind, we're paying the bill for something for the benefit of the Tennis Channel
Thank you.
Open.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilwoman.
But what you're saying is that we would be stopping that as part of the cutback.
But our contract with them requires us to give them notice by June 1st if we are not going to fund per our contract with them. That then gives them the option of either finding another venue or going ahead with our venue at their own risk. And they I don't remember what the time frame is, but sometime in the fall, they then would notify us of their intention to proceed.
The other question I had was reducing the transportation for after-school and work programs. I'm assuming that's for junior high and high school, and the highest crime rates come from the minute school lets out until about 7:38 at night. Could you just give us specific figures as to how much that costs? Because we're making a trade-off there that it's my understanding the national authorities say is it's very important to keep that particular age youth involved after school hours.
Councilwoman, that after-school, after-work program is solely a program from our adaptive division. It affects our physically challenged kids and adults. And the after-school portion talks about the portion where after their school hours they come to the Lorenzi Center, and the after-work speaks to the adults who come and use our centers. This program is solely an opportunity to get them out into the community during those hours when they attend, and that program is solely about a field trip to give them another experience. It's a cost for the buses, it's a cost for the venues that they go to, and it's approximately a $40,000 cost. This has nothing to do with traditional Safe Key community schools, after-schools programs.
So this after-school and work programs that you're talking about are field trips, study trips?
This particular program is solely for the adaptive division of our department, and it is for physically and mentally challenged, disabled adults and children. And this does give them the opportunity to venture out, if you will, to get away from the Lorenzi Center.
Are they with people who are skilled in this?
They are accompanied by our staff, certainly, and yes, we are skilled at that particular venture.
Could you give us additional information when we meet on how much that, you're saying it costs about $40,000?
That's approximately $40,000 in terms of $15,000. Let me see my chart here, if you would. I have a cheat sheet, I'm sorry. It's approximately $15,000 for the venues and another $25,000 that is used as transportation, buses that take them and transport them back and forth.
If you could, I would just like to also know where they went and what they, something about that, just from my understanding, what the value would be. Because even though it's not part of, I think, requirement of a city, most cities do provide a situation where the handicap interrelate with the non-handicapped, because that makes them better citizens and is supposed to help them be able to hold good jobs. But maybe there's other places they can get that. I don't know. I'd just like to have that information next time, please.
No problem.
Mayor Goodman?
Yes.
And would you please make that available to all of us? And of course, how many people are we talking about? Are we talking about 10 people or 20 people during the year, or are we talking about 250 people? That kind of information I'd like you to provide to us.
We'll provide it for you.
I think what you're saying, Councilwoman, is sometimes it's worth the price.
If I could, Councilwoman, just real quickly, and it'll save us the facilitation of all the paperwork. Typically, on a given day, we have approximately 30 to 40 individuals with disabilities at our Lorenzi Center. That would be youth. We have another 30 to 40 at our adult center. To answer your question as far as the cost, we're looking at reducing the field trips from 3 trips a week to 2 trips a week. I think it's important in that to understand that we're not reducing the experience of actually having a place to go. We're actually cutting our transportation back. So we would do 1 less field trip per week, but we would still have our normal program hours for all those individuals with disabilities. It's roughly $600 a bus per day between the 2 programs. So we're looking at, if we reduce it by 1 trip, approximately $30,000 a year.
I see. So it's the transportation you're eliminating. It's not the intermingling with others for the handicapped.
No, ma'am.
The hours
program
will
would
still be the
exist.
same.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Jackson? I'm sorry. Would you also please explain the impact of our community schools? How have they been affected due to the budget cuts?
I'd have to ask the recreation manager up here, please.
Councilman, while we're waiting, the community schools, you're talking about the community schools as separate from Safe Key and Track Break, correct?
Yes, I am.
There is no effect on community schools.
So the community schools will continue to operate like they've been operating?
Pretty much with the exception of some reduced hourly staff. So hourlies will be reduced in that area along with the community centers. So some hourly staff from community schools and community centers, but for the most part, they'll continue to do pretty much what we do now.
Thank you.
I mentioned earlier about our 5-year capital project plan. This is a summary chart that shows the $1.5 billion, the $1,469.5 million as it's scheduled out for the 5-year plan. And I will tell you that about, certainly less than 10% of this capital plan is being funded by anything with the general fund. Most of these monies are coming from interlocal agreements for the flood in roadways, for example, from the RTC, the Regional Transportation, and the Regional Flood. Much of our parks and trails is set in Nevada Public Lands Management Act. And the Rec and Comm Centers, that looks like a big number. I will tell you that's because the Performing Arts Center is included in that line as well. So very little, probably less than 10%, maybe 5 to 10% of the funding here is money that was already appropriated, general fund money for projects that are already in process and underway. But it's still a pretty healthy capital plan. So we're not stopping all of our capital work. I was asked for some questions about staffing increases. I think that was important. I wanted to, we've added about 620 positions in the last 10 years. Most of those have gone to public safety in the area of marshals and corrections officers and firemen, paramedics. We've also seen, because of the increase in rec centers in parks, field ops and leisure services have also had to add staff to keep pace with the newer, more acreage and more square feet. So that's where the increases of these are the absolute the absolute number counts of positions we've added. And if you were to look at position growth. Before you do, Your Honor, if I may, now would probably be the best time, Mark, to point out also in your budget cuts by department the small changes in regards to detention and enforcement, police services, and fire and rescue. And since you just reported on the FTE increases, where those increases, most of those increases occurred in regards to public safety.
Correct.
This is a clear message to the public that we take public safety very seriously here at the City of Las Vegas and are doing everything we can to protect the general public. And I just wanted to make that comment as I look at these numbers. Thank you, Your Honor.
Your Honor, I just wanted to concur with that and emphasize that, as I understand it in our charter, that the public safety is a prime responsibility of the city, and you're right, we are trying very hard in that area.
This next graph kind of accentuates that even more. The first, I've kind of put a little dashed line in here to right here and right here to kind of differentiate. But when we look at population, for the last 10 years, the city's population has grown about 3% on an annual percentage rate, whereas our general fund staffing has grown at a little over 2.5%. So our general fund hasn't added as much staff as the population, and that's probably to be expected with the technology that we've added to our workplace. But when you take the general fund and you pull it apart between public safety and non-public safety, you can see that our public safety side has grown at 4%. Again, we're trying to maintain some of our rapid growth in terms of area with the fire. We've reached our capacity with our jail. We've had to take over more of our jail space and terminate our contracts with the federal government for those inmate beds, and so we've had to put on more staff for that. Non-public safety has grown at less than 1.5%. And then because someone asked the question, I think it was Councilman Brown, wanted to know, how does that look between represented and non-represented? Represented are those employees that are represented by collective bargaining agreement, and those that aren't. The ones that aren't are typically yourselves and the executives and the appointees that we were talking about earlier. And you can see that the represented workforce has grown at about 2.6%, whereas the non-represented workforce over that 10 years has grown less than 2%. So that maybe answers some of the questions you may have had about the relative growth of the workforce over the last 10 years. We're not planning any changes in our property tax rate. I do not have at this point all the other localities' tax rates. So this is an estimate, if you will, for 2009. And what I really wanted to point out, which I point out every year, is that when we talk about the state, we're really talking about those two numbers in total. The state often tells us that their tax rate is only 18 cents per $100 of assessed value, but we also know that they're responsible for funding the school district, and to the extent that about half of that $1.30 on the school district is operating, and to the extent that that operating meets their per pupil funding, then they take a direct offset against their general fund contribution towards the Clark County School District and all the other school districts to their benefit. So it is a direct offset for them. So we just remind people that when you look at your tax bill and you see you pay $3.27, only about 23 cents of that goes directly to the City of Las Vegas. And that includes the Fire Safety Initiative as well. And this is a graphic representation of the property tax abatement. I haven't had a chance to update it for FY09 yet because the data we've gotten from the state and from the our local governments isn't accurate, and they're trying to revise that for us. But this, I don't know how well it shows up in the screen, but this portion of the bar here represents the amount of the property tax bill that is abated under AB 49. So when folks get their tax bill, they see the total assessed tax, then they see an abatement, and they see a net tax, and they focus on the net tax. I'm afraid a lot of folks are expecting, because of all the discussion we've had about property values dropping, that they're going to get a reduction in the property tax bill. They're not. Some will see a reduction, but the vast majority of us will not see a reduction in property tax bill. We'll just see the portion of this abatement diminished. Until that abatement's gone through entirely, you're not going to see a reduction in property taxes. So I'm just pointing that out to you. And finally, we didn't talk about our enterprise funds. Most of our enterprise funds are doing just fine. Again, those are funds that are paid for, are funded based on the services that they provide. People who buy those services pay for those the cost of that operation. And the one enterprise fund that we've had difficulty with is the building and safety, because of the drop-off in primarily residential construction. And just reminding you that this chart here, the dollars over here go with the blue bars, and the dollars, and that represents, excuse me, it doesn't go with the blue bars, it goes, the revenues and expenditures goes with the lines, the solid line and the dashed red line. And then on the other side, the retained earnings goes with the blue bar. And you can see what happened to us is this drop in fund balance is attributed to this drop in revenue. A revenue now, we had approximately $5.7 million, almost a $6 million shortfall in revenue in fiscal year 08. That's what gave rise to the reduction in force for 31 building and safety employees. And you can still see that we still are having an issue in fiscal year 09 in that our revenues will still be less than our expenditures, and I know we're putting together a plan to come back and address that mid-year, that there's likely, unless unless there's something made up on the rental or the commercial side, we're likely to be looking at some additional adjustments for building and safety. So,
Mayor Goodman?
Yes.
Mr. Vincent, Dr. Selby, going back to the rate standardization fund that you mentioned early in your presentation, which is very informative, Should we as a council take this as a lesson learned to increase our funding, our fund from the 10 to 12% that we currently have in reserve? Mark mentioned, what was it, the 52 weeks, Mark, that we have in the year and 6 months of revenue in reserve? Am I accurate in stating that?
Well, right now, we have a policy that says that we will try to maintain a fund balance of not less than 12%, and we'll be able to achieve that in 9 and possibly 10 if we create a rate stabilization fund.
Right.
And
the point I'm trying to make is, should we now take a look at the opportunity of increasing that percentage from 12 to possibly 12 to 15 versus 10 to 12, so that the reduction in force that we've just recently seen could possibly assist a future administration or some future employees from being laid off in the city of Las Vegas? Is that something that we can take a look at to protect ourselves in the future, thinking outwardly?
Well, that's one of our suggestions that we were going to wrap up with. But bear in mind that suggestion does not help the building and safety
I
enterprise.
understand it doesn't.
And you couldn't create a rate stabilization fund for the building and safety enterprise because NRS 354 has specific limits as to how much of a reserve it can create. So that's limited.
And I can respect that, and I understand that it's limited, but it leads me to this thought. We are still going through an economic downturn, and although we have projected and forecasted that prediction can be totally wrong. And we could possibly, the reality of the matter is we could still possibly face some layoffs if in fact our economy continues to weaken. So I'm sitting here today looking outwardly, trying to figure out, or trying to get some level of understanding as to how in fact we can now take this 10, 12% and increase it so that in the future, as we move forward, whether it be this administration or another administration, future employees, that they're protected, and that we, as a council today, put in a measure to provide some level of a buffer or a level of extension, if you will, from the time period that we have today as far as the reserve is concerned, and expanding it a little bit more than just the 6-week, possibly to a 12-week or 14-week. Can you speak on that?
Councilman, I'll jump in a little bit, and then Mark can certainly fill in. I'll give you my perspective. I think part of the reason we're not in a budget crisis right now is just what you're saying, that reserve that was it 2002 when we adopted our budget policies, that we put the self-imposed minimum 12% just for what you're saying. Mm-hmm. But there's also a balance between what is standard in government financing that usually accounts for a bond rating or fiscal stability. But we're also cautious because if we just start building that up to 12 to 15 or 18%, then we leave ourselves open to criticism that we're just collecting all these revenues and taxes and putting perhaps too much in the bank. You know, there's a balance about running the city as efficiently as possible and protecting ourselves with that 12% versus let's run it efficiently but keep building that up. That will, and we have been criticized, even with the 12%, that why aren't we spending that $60 million? Why aren't we spending that $70 million? So I understand what you're saying, and I agree wholeheartedly. But that 12% seemed to be a pretty good balance when we adopted it back in 2002. Now, if we want to look at adjusting that upwards a little bit, we can certainly evaluate that. But I've always felt that we were being very conservative in that approach at 12%, Mark, compared to some others.
Well, I've gone back to this general fund balance projection slide. If you could take a look at that. The reality is that from 2000 to even 2009, we have been operating at a level above 12%. Remember, 12% would be right about here.
It'd be about 6.2 weeks. So part of our budget policy has been to be conservative. We and I say this every year, and it's a fact, we try to be conservative on our revenues and our expenditures, and what that means is we try to budget a little bit less on our revenues and a little bit higher on our expenditures, knowing we create a cushion. In the past, that cushion is what has gone towards funding one-time capital projects as a source of money. And it was before SNPLMA, it was our major source of money for parks and recreation. That was predominantly our only source, other than the meager RCT money you get and the LVCVA money. And so that was successful for a long time. And what's happened, because of this downturn, we're no longer able to do that, at least for this period of time. This chart here represents this circle right here represents what happens to those 3 years fund balance by creating a stabilization fund to carry us through 10 and 11, as opposed to what it would look like if we didn't. And so, in fact, to Councilman Barlow, what we are talking about doing is creating a stabilization fund of about $30 million to carry us through fiscal years 10 and 11, because we don't know for sure what's going to happen in 10 and 11. They are a ways away. But if we take action today, then we can, or for this, when I say today, I mean the budget we're going to file on June 2nd. If we file a budget on June 2nd and create some sort of a fund to help us with 10 and 11, then we can at least address that in those years, that need in those years.
And I might add, too, Councilman, that we believe the stabilization fund concept is a sound financial tool, and that should be replenished as we get the ability to do so. But as Mark is forecasting, we'll create it, and we're going to have to spend it down unless revenues start to turn around. But at some point in the future, when they do, we would strongly urge the council to adopt a policy that we continue to fund that stabilization fund and be able to supplement these kind of downturns as they occur in the future.
And I can appreciate that. I want to thank Councilman Brown as well as Mayor Pro Tem Reese's comments as well. And I thought that it was important that I bring the topic up so that we can at least express it to the community, to let them know that we are thinking about it, and these are the measures that we're putting in place to at least have dialogue and sharing dialogue, so that we can, continue to think of creative ways to make sure that we keep our funds balanced and continue to provide the goods and services to our constituency. So thank you both.
We may also need to do some legislative work in 09. The current law has limitations on what we can use the stabilization fund for if we were to create one. One thing it does is it limits how much you can contribute. The stabilization fund cannot be more than 10% of the prior year's expenditures. So it automatically has a $50,000 cap. So if we kept our policy at 10 or 12%, this would be an additional 10% that you would have in a stabilization fund, but it could only be 10%. And then the catch I have with that is there's only two ways you can use that money. You can use that when your actual revenue is less than budgeted, which I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense to me. It seems like that's too loose to me. And then the other issue, because this law was created back before 9/11, the other issue is you can access it for natural disasters. But what about man-made disasters like terrorism or some other event? That needs to. So there's some weaknesses in the current statute that we would want to work through. We need to be careful about how we create this, that we don't limit ourselves in some fashion that we regret later on, until we can get perhaps the NRS changed so it's more applicable to what's going on today. So I mentioned that. So I think that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank goodness I know some of you just couldn't wait for me to stop, particularly some of you out there. Budget recap, this slide, just a recap of what we talked about before. I'm not going to belabor it. I did want to close with a couple of things. Whether we call it a stabilization fund or whether we freeze the money where it is today, it's clear in my mind that we need to do something to create a reserve of $30 million that can carry us through 10 and 11. Now, if we get a quicker recovery or recovers higher than we thought, and that money's not necessary for that, we can revisit it then, and we can put it back on the projects that we took it from, or we can do whatever other direction that you give us with it.
Hopefully, we'll protect ourselves in defining the stabilization fund and these monies so that they won't be grabbed by the state saying that we're awash with money. That has to be part of this process, too.
That's right.
I don't know how we assure ourselves of that. I think that's up to the lawyers probably, but we don't want to put ourselves into a situation where our prudence and our fiscal conservatism is going to be used against us.
Your Honor?
Yes.
To add to that, I think in the years to come, we're going to have some healthy discussions about home rule and how we create better revenue for the city of Las Vegas and not be held so hostage to state laws in the legislature in regards to how we raise money for the city.
Absolutely.
As I've said in the past and reported to you before, that about 88% of our revenues are controlled by state law. You have, as an elected board, have really no impact on at all.
Right. Did you have an additional point that you want to make?
Well, we currently, let me backtrack because I wrote some notes and I got them out. The first thing that we need some direction on is the capital projects, the internal service funds, and those other sources that I identified on that one slide, which I can go back to pretty quickly. I need some guidance that these capital projects, these internal service fund replacement delays, and these other sources, this is what we're looking at freezing at today. Whether we create a stabilization fund or we freeze that money in place, I'm looking for some direction from you as a board, and if not today, certainly by May 20th at our budget hearing, that these funds, whether we transfer them and create a stabilization fund or don't, and we'll figure that out between now and then, we'll come with a recommendation of what we'll do. But somehow or another, we have to have some agreement that these are the projects and the funds that we want to freeze based on staff's recommendation. So that's item number one. Item two is give us some direction on exploring the stabilization fund concept. If the current NRS is too restrictive and we're kind of nervous about that, we may need to come up with a different plan of action. Clearly, if we feel there's some weakness in the current NRS, then we need to come up with a plan of action with the 09 session to fix that language. So that was item number two. Item number three is, I guess, really along the lines is the mayor's opening remarks and the direction that he gave Doug and myself and the rest of the staff about continuing to look at our program reviews, continuing to look at ways that we can enhance revenues and reduce our expenditures. And if as Councilman Barlow has pointed out, if we haven't seen the worst and it actually does become worse and the $30 million isn't enough, then we will likely have to take some other action, and we need to be prepared for what that action might be. Because if there isn't any resource for us to create a revenue stabilization fund from because things get worse, then our only response is going to have to be to reduce services even more than we already have today.
All right. Are there any questions of Mr. Vincent? Before you have questions? Okay. Councilman Brown.
Mark, if you could speak briefly as far as the capital program. It's our understanding that we're going to freeze any new capital programming for potentially up to 18 months.
I don't think that was what we indicated. What we're talking about is this list of projects here, which I think there's 18 projects, including the atrium tenant improvements. These are the projects that we're talking about either freezing or taking the cut column, that middle column, and using that for the stabilization. There are other projects. You still have residential construction tax money. You're still going to have SNPLM money. Those projects will continue to go forward.
But that's just a sampling of a list that last year there was probably parks and those type projects. There was at least an additional 20 to 25 those are going to be on hold?
The projects, well, projects that have already been either started, either the design is complete or construction started, those are going to continue. I don't know that we have actually identified any projects that are 100% funded that we are asking to be placed on hold. That isn't on this list. I don't recall us identifying projects that we were going to put on hold that didn't make it on this list, Councilman.
Okay, so the capital, let's take parks, for instance, the capital project budget list, and I don't know if this is final or not, on page
Okay.
2 of the handout, not on this one.
Oh, and the handout?
Which handout was it?
We provided you with this, this booklet this morning, and in there, in addition to the slides, there were 2 handouts. One that you also saw in the briefing. They were also handed out in the briefings. One is the capital projects. It says it's the
Here it is.
if I get it right. The first one says it's the capital project budget 2009 to 2013, and it looks like this. And then the other one says capital project impact and operating budgets, and it looks very similar, but it has the operating impacts, and we briefed on those a couple of weeks ago. So on page 2 of the capital, Councilman?
Correct.
Okay.
The park trail section.
Yes?
So all those that are listed were with funding, partial or full funding, are recommended for approval in this budget cycle contingent upon SNPLR or whatever funding source we're going.
That's correct.
Okay.
If you go down the list, you see there's some acronyms in there for the funding source. Some of it you may have figured out, but the RCT is Residential Construction Tax, SNP MLA is Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act. There are some projects that may have a combination, like fund balance and SNPLMA. There's some that has NDOT and so on and so forth.
Okay, and back on page 1, under fire, are these stations, I see a couple stations are deferred to 2010. Was that under the original plan, or are we?
This is under the original plan, and it's my understanding, I'm glad you brought that up, it's my understanding that the fire department is working with Councilman Ross and a few other council members about making an adjustment to the plan, but still staying within the budget, but making some changes. So I suspect that this portion of this plan may look different when we come back on May 20th.
Okay. And the point that we've discussed in the briefings is just this, there seems to be a catch-22 here. We're trying to be, especially with capital projects, very conservative, making sure that the money's there to spend it, and yet we're seeing in the market this may be the best time for us to go out for these type projects, at least in my 10 years, as far as competitive bids and contractors out there really hungry for work. So if we can continue to evaluate that balance, I'm not sure if we have contemplated any kind of bonding, even short-term or medium-term, for not big amounts. What the bottom line statement is, I'd just be concerned that other than those projects that are approved and funded for this upcoming fiscal year, if we're going to wait and delay anything beyond that, I think the more we wait, be it a month or 6 months or 18 months, the more difficult it's going to be to even consider those in 2011 or 2012. And again, there's some type of balance there. So I was surprised with the number on the reserve fund this year. I didn't know it was that high. And I'm not suggesting that we take that money and go bond for additional projects, but I'd like to at least take a look at those priority projects that we could do from an infrastructure standpoint, from a fire station standpoint, from some park and trail projects, just to make sure that that's the most comprehensive list we feel comfortable moving forward with.
Yeah, we agree with you, Councilman, that it's a catch-22, but to the extent that we continue that, keep that capital program going forward, I think price-wise, we're much better off.
And we talked about the RDA. I saw that we did actually shift some of the funding. Have we looked into the legality of what the RDA can do as far as funding our general fund operating costs? I.e., if we go forward with a city hall scenario and you're deferring the first few years of that payment, is that something, because it's part of the RDA, that we could fully fund out of the RDA and not the traditional general fund?
I'll steal a little bit of Scott's thunder on that, but on Wednesday, when you hear the For City Live Work project and the report on City Hall, I think you're going to hear that is what part of what makes the City Hall scenario under a lease arrangement, lease purchase arrangement, live work workable, and that you can tying the PQ parcel, which would be the first in many years, the first new downtown resort casino or hotel casino that would have an impact on our downtown gaming revenues. That tax increment on that building alone would equal about half of what would be the debt service if we exercise the purchase options. So, and again, that moving the City Hall creates the ability to sell this land, the land across the street, which is another real estate asset that John Restrepo was talking about. You take that cash and you can use that cash to help you either pay for the deferred rent and or apply towards the purchase price. And so that's what begins to make something like a City Hall a viable thing, because you can do it on the backs of the redevelopment success. And there's no legal exclusion from us to do that.
Talking to the mayor earlier and listening to Mr. Restrepo, as far as we're not going to see that growth. We've gotten to the point now, and with the constraints on our land availability, even in the next 5 or 10 years, if we get the disposal boundaries moved, we don't have any industrial. We have little office opportunity left, very little commercial. The Centennial Hills may be the largest big commercial that we have. So I talked to the mayor earlier that our downtown core and Union Park and everything else that's happening through the RDA is going to be the success or failure of funding the city over the next 20, 30 years. And as long as we can make sure that we can enjoy creativity with the RDA, or even legislatively, if we have to start identifying ways we can ensure the funding of the RDA helps with the overall city's budget process, I think that's something we should take a hard look at. Because that's, according to Mr. Strepo, that may be the last of the last frontier for the city, and may actually be the core.
And the RDA will sunset some year. Right now it's scheduled to sunset in March of 2031. When it sunsets, the revenues it has generated in property tax will go back to the benefit of all the taxing authorities, which will be one, and it'll be a significant boon to a lot of those entities. And not only the theory, I think the actual practices. If it weren't for the success of the RDA, that revenue wouldn't be there, but it will be there. And
2031?
That's when it currently sunsets.
I think that's around the time the mayor has announced his retirement, at least from this city. The marketing group, the consultant that came on board, has that been factored in as far as any type revenue impact for next fiscal year?
We haven't factored any revenue, any of that, so any of that would be plus up, unplanned for.
And the final point, and out of fairness to Chairman Mike Kern on the audit, I'd just like to put this on the record for those council members that heard earlier. He was concerned, as far as his view of the audit committee, is a function almost independent of the day-to-day operations of City Hall, working directly toward for the mayor and the city council, with the function as far as identifying increased efficiencies and weaknesses at the city. And he also went into some savings that the audit group has given benefit to the overall operations. And this is paraphrasing, of course, but he felt this is one function that, if anything, you should strengthen in the economic times we're going through, or at least protect and preserve what we have, or he feels strongly that we'll lose the momentum that's been built up over the last 4, 5, 6 years with the audit. So that was his direction. He really wanted to bring this back to the council to make sure that those thoughts were expressed. And reports, a couple things, Dr. Selby, especially over the next few weeks, we're looking at them. I would, as you go back, maybe not over the next few weeks, but certainly over the next 6 months, and the mayor's going to be far more specific on this direction, but I would encourage us to look at some of the audit reports that have been done over the last 5, 6, 7 years, because I know for a fact, just looking quickly at a few of them, there were some very direct recommendations that I'm not sure have been fulfilled that relate to cost savings. That, and also, if we could revisit that pretty comprehensive marketing report we did at the end of the 90s, or 97, 98. Very, very comprehensive book.
Talking about the, it wasn't a marketing report, it was a, it was Management Partners Review, that review.
Because likewise, that one had some real significant recommendations. Many, like Performance Plus, that have come to fruition, but others, not so much this low-lying fruit, but it might be good to dust some of those reports out, that management report and the audit reports. There may be some areas identified that we could take a second look at.
So many of those things in the management partners, like our transport fees, was so there were some good things recommended in there.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Well,
Mayor
Councilman.
Goodman, thank you. Just to kind of follow one of Councilman Brown's thoughts, another level. I know that today we've discussed, or we've touched on some programs or some things about programs to either scale back or eliminate. I think what we need to do as we look in the future, and Mayor Goodman, I think in his opening remarks, talked about thoughts on our future. I've said a number of times from this dais that I wish some of our community and civic leaders in the 90s could have foreseen better our traffic situation and planned a little quicker. But what I'd like to see us doing as a council is just that, is I'd like to be looking to the future, not just 2 years or 5 years, but perhaps 10 or 15 years out, and to be thinking about, what should city government be in, or what shouldn't we be in the business of doing? Because I think everybody's saying now the days of double-digit growth are over, and the prosperity from 2 and 3 and 5 years ago we'll never see again. So I'd like to see us as we look to the future, looking at some of the programs, either for potential elimination or scaling back, if you will. Secondly, have we ever given any thought to consolidating departments? We have 17 departments, and certainly they each have a separate purpose and role and use. But has there ever been given any thought of consolidating a couple of those departments? Whether it would work, whether it would still serve our constituents, whether it could be a cost-saving measure. Next, the vast majority of government expense is labor. I think we should be looking into the future about some cost savings there. I know the county did something a couple years ago, and it dealt mainly with PERS, but perhaps we should be looking in the future, so when we hire employees in 2 years and 5 years, perhaps their expectations can be a little different than the expectations of our current employees. I think it's just prudent and wise and good government and good leading to be looking to the future about how we can save money. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman.
Yes, I wondered if there are any possibilities of looking if we can coordinate or operate certain areas in cooperation with the county. I've talked to the mayor about this, and he's And I've also talked with some of the commissioners who seem to be interested because they're in a budget situation too. One of them mentioned was Parks and Recreation. I didn't mention that, one of the commissioners did. And I don't know which might be the better way to go, but if there are certain avenues we could follow in certain activities or projects or programs where we could unite so that we don't duplicate or double efforts, if we could just look into that. There may be none, but I think the time is ripe with the people in the county commission, at least with 2 or 3 of them, and maybe we could save money for a lot of people by coordinating or joining some of our programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments at this time before we make a motion? All right. Going to try to include in the motion. When is the first meeting in October, Ms. Bridges? October 1st. All right. My motion is that the manager and the director of finance report back to us on October the 1st the results of a fundamental review of city operations, programs, and services that are neither tied to our key priorities, of which you are most familiar, nor are fundamental to our operating function. When you do that, you are directed to prioritize or rank those programs or projects and identify the performance metrics associated with them, as well as the labor and other costs in making that review, and then tell us what the aggregate savings would be if, in fact, one or more of those programs were terminated. That's the first directive. The second directive, and I'm taking from the council's comments what they deem to be important, is to review what benefits the city employees are presently getting and what benefits could be addressed in future collective bargaining sessions, since the happy days are here again. When we sing it, will be different from the happy days that we've experienced in the last 8 years. And based on Mr. Restrepo's description of why the benefits are more substantial in the public sector than in the private sector, evaluate whether or not those initial determinations are still valid. I think this image of Las Vegas as being, quote, Sin City, end quote, as he said, has dissipated over the years, and now we're looked at as the entertainment capital of the world. And people, I believe, want to come here rather than resist coming here, and whether working for the city of Las Vegas is, in fact, a perk because of the salaries rather than the benefits. And I'd like to see that evaluation. Along the lines of what Councilwoman said, as far as consolidation not only of services, but I think with what Mr. Restrepo said, he characterizes Las Vegas as being, the city of Las Vegas, as being in a position where we can't grow because of our territorial boundaries. We can't have industrial because of the cost of land. We have done everything within our power to Manhattanize ourselves and go up in order to address those issues of land costs. But as Southern Nevada goes, so goes the rest of the state. As the city of Las Vegas goes, so goes the rest of Southern Nevada. I think that our health is tied very much to the health of the unincorporated area of the county and North Las Vegas and Henderson. And there has to be some evaluation as to a regional government, whether you call it consolidation or not. I don't know That seems to have a resistance on the part of elected officials, but if we're not healthy and if we're not prospering, it's going to have a reverberating and deleterious effect upon the other entities. So I think we really have to start thinking a little bit differently than we have in the past, be less territorial, not be so possessive of our fiefdoms, and really evaluate this as to what is the future of Southern Nevada, not just what's the future of the city of Las Vegas. And discussions should take place, Dr. Selby, with the managers of these other entities, and perhaps presentations have to be made with the electeds from the other entities in order to address this. We're going into different times, and the way this community was founded may no longer be relevant to the way it has to proceed in the future. So I'd like to have that explored as well. I want the stabilization fund to be protected. I don't want it to be out there as a potential grab by the state, which I think it will be the tendency from what I hear the thought process is up in Carson City. And I want you to proceed diligently as you have in protecting us against these events in the future, and protecting our constituents as far as the services which we want so badly to provide to them. I mean, we sorely want to provide these services. This is not something that we like to do here, but it's going to take study on your part and briefing to the council, which I would like at all of our briefings, so our philosophical bent will be related to you, and you'll be able to include that in your equation when making the evaluation. So that's my motion. Let's vote on that, please. Opposed? Motion carries. And I want to thank Dr. Selby, Mr. Vincent, Mr. Restrepo, the whole staff, our staff out there, the directors, the administrative folks who are helping them, for participating in this. It's very, very important that you know where we stand, because everybody has their pet projects, and everybody thinks what they're doing is the most important thing in the world, but this has to be a collective effort if we're going to succeed in addressing these very, very difficult economic times. Okay, this is the time for citizens' participation. Public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters within the jurisdiction of the City Council. No subject may be acted upon by the City Council unless that subject is on the agenda and is scheduled for action. Would anyone like to be heard at this time? All right, seeing none, the meeting is adjourned. Okay, was that it? Padres were on tonight. E2. E2. ESPN 2.